Hello everyone, welcome to my channel. I am here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where are you from and what time are you watching? Now get comfortable and relax. Case 1. A young father and mother are found dead in a car at a cottage in Castle Rock, Wisconsin. The man is sitting in the driver's seat and the woman is found in the trunk. Officials arrive and quickly determine that Leslie Howell and Trevor Buchanan have succumbed to carbon monoxide fumes that have been funneled into the car through a vacuum hose, apparently all set up by the deceased pair themselves. Combined, the two young parents had a total of 6 children. 4 were Leslie's and 2 were Trevor's. But the couple was not married. They were not even dating. They had been thrust together by deadly circumstances that neither of them ever saw coming. And with their deaths, the oddly connected couple took secrets with them that would remain unknown for decades to come. Colin Howell was born in 1959 and grew up amid intense political and religious conflict in Belfast, Ireland. The city was deeply divided between Catholic nationalists and Protestant loyalists. Despite the unrest, or perhaps as a result of it, many of the Irish turned to their religious communities for comfort and security. Colin's parents were no exception. They were evangelical Baptists who aimed to instill the importance of faith in their son. Growing up, Colin attended 3 church services every Sunday and was an active member of a Christian youth organization called the Boys Brigade. As a teenager, he aspired to become a missionary and sought the respect of his fellow churchgoers. However, his deep commitment to his beliefs often set him apart from his peers, leading him to become a loner. While his friends frequented clubs and pubs, Colin stayed home, perceiving such places as sinful. Yet despite his outward godliness, Colin struggled with inner conflicts. And as he grew older, the conflicts became more pronounced. In 1978, at the age of 19, he began buying pornographic magazines, quickly developing an obsession. It's suspected that his inner turmoil and guilt led him to abandon his aspirations of becoming a missionary. By the time he finished secondary school, Colin had decided to pursue a career in medicine, aiming to help people in a different capacity. But he was not academically strong enough to get into medical school, so he opted for dentistry as a more attainable goal. Colin enrolled in a dentistry program at Queen's University in Belfast, where he studied for 6 years. Throughout his time in college, he continued to attend church regularly. In 1980, he caught the eye of a fellow parishioner named Leslie Clark. Born in Plymouth in March 1960, Leslie had 1 brother, and both of them pursued careers in the health sector, with Chris studying anesthesiology and Leslie becoming a nurse. It was during her nursing studies that she met Colin, who was placed at a nearby hospital. The couple was attracted to each other, a case of opposites attract. While Colin was quiet and reserved, Leslie was outgoing and sociable. The two quickly fell for each other and began dating. In 1982, a few years into their relationship, things took an unexpected turn when Leslie became pregnant. The news sent the virtuous Colin into a spiral. An unplanned pregnancy out of wedlock was a significant and public sin, unlike his previous addiction to pornographic magazines, which he could hide. Dealing with this situation would require an act even more taboo than premarital sex, abortion. Faced with the dilemma of abiding by his beliefs and keeping the baby or preserving his godly image and secretly terminating the pregnancy, Colin chose to preserve his image. Although Leslie was hesitant about having an abortion, she feared that Colin would leave her if she didn't do it. So the couple traveled to London, where abortions were legal, to terminate the pregnancy. Then, despite the moral, emotional, and logistical toll that the termination took on the couple, just a few months after they returned, Leslie was pregnant again, landing them in the exact same situation they were just in. With the devout Christian not wanting to admit he was having sex before marriage, Colin pressured Leslie into having another abortion. They returned to London to repeat the procedure. Then, just a few weeks after returning from the second termination, Leslie was pregnant again, back to London for her 3rd pregnancy termination in a matter of months. After Colin graduated from dental school, he and Leslie got married and relocated to Coleraine, a charming village on Northern Ireland's northern coast. Colin secured employment at a local dental practice, while Leslie continued her nursing career. Initially, their life seemed perfect, with stable jobs and a comfortable lifestyle. In October 1984, Leslie gave birth to their first child, Matthew. The period marked a significant shift in their lives. Colin's flourishing dental career allowed Leslie to leave her nursing job and focus on raising their child. The Howells were active members of their local Baptist church, where Colin took on leadership roles, including heading the youth fellowship and volunteering with children's groups. These roles satisfied his desire for religious authority and community respect. But the dynamics at home were less harmonious. Leslie struggled with her new role as a stay-at-home mother, longing to return to her nursing career. Colin, however, expected her to adhere to traditional homemaker responsibilities. The tension was compounded with the birth of their second child, Lauren, in November of 1986, further increasing the demands on Leslie. The following year, Colin decided to advance his career by purchasing office space and opening his own dental practice. While the venture underscored his professional success, it did little to alleviate the unhappiness in his marriage. Colin hired a dentist, and his clientele quickly grew. The practice's success prompted Colin to stretch his finances to the limit by purchasing a large house in 1989. That was the same year they welcomed their third child, Daniel. The large house reinforced Colin's image as a family man within their church community. But despite the outward appearance the house reflected, reality was the opposite. While the house was indeed spacious, and Colin's dental practice was thriving, the financial strain that the large mortgage and 3 kids placed on the family resulted in the home being incomplete and lacking basic amenities like carpeting. And it seemed to be in a constant state of renovation. Leslie began to feel overwhelmed by the mounting responsibilities and the financial burden imposed by Colin's decisions. She started fantasizing about escaping the situation and reportedly began saving money in case she ever decided to leave her husband. And her desire to leave became stronger than ever when she found out that Colin was having an affair with a former classmate from the university. While Colin was well aware that his infidelity violated one of the 10 Commandments, he rationalized that it was preferable to a divorce, just as he had once chosen abortion over the public shame of an out-of-wedlock pregnancy. When Leslie discovered the affair, she confronted both Colin and his mistress, and they supposedly stopped seeing each other. But Leslie had had enough and was ready to end it. However, before she managed to leave the relationship, she became pregnant with their 4th child. The new pregnancy intensified their marital conflicts, and Colin soon found yet another woman to fill his needs. It was this new relationship that would shape the future for everyone involved. Enter Hazel Buchanan. Hazel was a friendly, attractive, married nursery school assistant. Her husband, Trevor Buchanan, was a police officer. The couple had 2 children and attended the same church as the Howells. Hazel had started working as a nursery school assistant to escape the monogamy of her life at home, one where her husband would often work long hours, leaving Hazel feeling neglected and isolated. It was while Colin was taking his 3-year-old daughter to a playgroup that he met Hazel. Colin and Hazel would attend regular swimming lessons organized by the church. Hazel's interactions with Colin became the highlight of her day. During one of the lessons, Colin apologized to Hazel for not having innocent thoughts about her. Hazel replied, "Well, I'm not that innocent myself." Colin went to her house later to teach her how to play the guitar, and he said she answered the door in a short denim skirt and sleeveless low-cut blouse. He said, "I knew I wasn't there for guitar lessons." The two started an affair that took place not just in their homes, but in Colin's dentist's chair and at secluded spots like Castle Row Forest Park. Then, in August of 1990, Hazel discovered that she was pregnant. Uncertain whether the father was Colin or her husband, she turned to Colin for a solution. His suggestion? A trip to London for a procedure that he was more than familiar with. As Colin continued his affair with Hazel, Leslie grew increasingly suspicious and confided her concerns to their pastor. The pastor had already been suspicious since a church elder had previously reported seeing Colin and Hazel together at Castle Row Forest Park. When the pastor confirmed it Colin, he denied the accusations, claiming to be a good Christian who would never cheat on his spouse. Unconvinced, the pastor visited Hazel's home, and she promptly confessed to the affair. The pastor advised the couple to be truthful to everyone involved, including both Leslie and Trevor. They did. Each of them informed their respective spouses of the affair, but minimized the extent of it, claiming that it was purely emotional and not physical. Colin was stripped of his church volunteer roles, and the couples began receiving counseling through the church, along with strict guidelines they were required to follow. Trevor was devastated, but was eager to move past the affair and repair his marriage. However, Leslie, who had just had her child, struggled to forgive, with this being the second time she had learned of her husband having an affair. She withdrew into a deep depression. She began taking antidepressants and drinking more heavily, a practice that she had begun to a lesser extent after she found out about Colin's first affair. A few weeks later, Colin revealed to Leslie that his affair with Hazel had indeed been sexual. The revelation was the final straw for Leslie. In a fit of rage, she attacked Colin before locking herself in the bathroom. She then ingested a large quantity of acetaminophen, attempting to overdose, then drove off, leaving a note behind that would eventually play a pivotal role in Colin's future plans. Colin called for help, and Leslie was found unharmed. She spent 3 days in the hospital recovering. After that, both Colin and Leslie appeared to genuinely try to repair their marriage, but that only lasted a few months before, unsurprisingly, Colin returned seeing Hazel. It was around that time in late April of 1991 that Leslie's father moved into the couple's home to help Leslie care for the children. Not long after he moved in, Leslie and Colin returned home from an evening at the theater to find her father, who had been suffering from flu-like symptoms, collapse on the kitchen floor. Emergency responders arrived, but it was too late. Examinations revealed that he had died from a heart attack. Leslie was shattered. The tragedy further reduced her support system and led her to increasingly rely on alcohol to cope. By that point, the couple's marriage was on the brink of collapse, but fearing the public stigma of a divorce, they continued to stay married. That was until Colin came up with a plan. Much like his earlier decisions to conceal premarital pregnancies with secret abortions, he sought another way out. On May 19, 1991, at around 8:30 a.m., a church elder received a phone call from Colin Howell. Colin informed him that Leslie had not been home since last night and that her car was gone. The elder rushed to the Howells' home. Colin told him that he thought Leslie might have gone off with Trevor Buchanan and asked for help in finding them. He suggested that they might be at some cottages called the 12 Apostles. The elder drove to the cottage Colin specified, but didn't see Leslie or Trevor. He returned to the Howells' home and relayed his findings, noting though that he had not checked the garage. So Colin called another church elder asking again to check the cottage. The elder drove to the location and didn't see anyone inside the house, but noticed a car in the garage with its driver's door open. But before he could investigate, he was distracted by what he thought was movement in an upstairs window. Suspecting that it was Trevor and Leslie, he called up to them, didn't receive a response, then returned back to the house to tell Colin. Then, a few hours later, Colin asked the first elder to return to the cottage to check again, this time providing him with the keys to the property. The elder decided to take a police officer with him this time. After searching the home again, they checked the garage. There, they discovered the bodies of Trevor and Leslie. They checked for signs of life, but there were none. Authorities were called to the scene. Leslie's car had been reversed into the garage. Trevor's body was in the driver's seat, and Leslie was in the trunk. A vacuum cleaner pipe was found near Leslie's head, loosely connected to the car's exhaust pipe. In the trunk, Leslie had on headphones connected to a Walkman and was surrounded by family photos. A forensic medical officer pronounced both Trevor and Leslie dead at 2:15 p.m., noting that they had likely been dead for at least 12 hours. Forensic examinations determined that both victims died from carbon monoxide poisoning. That finding, along with the accounts from Colin and Hazel, led authorities to conclude that the deceased pair, distraught over their spouse's affair, made it pact to end it all in the garage of that cottage. But had they? There were several indications that something more sinister may have been at play, starting with evidence that was clearly apparent at the scene, like the position of the driver's seat. The driver's seat where Trevor was sitting was positioned far too forward for Trevor's legs to fit properly. He would not have driven the car in such a cramped position. So, whoever actually drove the car to its destination was likely much shorter than Trevor. Colin Howell was significantly shorter than Trevor. Trevor's legs were so ill-fitting that one of his feet was actually dangling outside of the open car door, which led to another clue. Despite a hose being rigged to pump the deadly fumes into the car, Trevor's foot dangling out of the door meant that the car door was left open, and even the car window was left open as well. An ineffective way to trap fumes in the car. And although the scene was intended to look as though the couple had made a pact to end everything together, why were they separated? It seemed highly unusual that such a pact would result in them being in separate parts of the car. The more likely scenario would have been for them to both be in the front seats side by side. Also suspicious was that Leslie's shoes were only partially on her feet, which would have been a highly unlikely way for her to enter the trunk herself. And then there were the injuries. Photographs of Trevor post-mortem showed that he sustained injuries to his mouth and his nose, and there was blood coming from the back of his head. Colin explained that Trevor had been involved in a minor skirmish earlier, which authorities accepted. Blood was even found on Trevor's sweatshirt, but it was never examined to see who it belonged to. Additionally, Colin himself had a cut on his forehead. He told the authorities that he had bumped his head. And remember how Colin insisted that the elders check the cottage. Despite his 3 separate attempts to direct elders to the place where victims would eventually be found, authorities failed to ask him why he was so insistent or how he knew. And then there was the issue of Colin and Hazel's credibility. Despite authorities knowing that both Colin and Hazel had lied to them about certain aspects of their affair, they still considered them credible witnesses and relied on their statements about what happened. There was also relevant information that authorities dismissed. They remained aware that Colin may have attempted to murder Leslie on a previous occasion. Friends of Leslie's reported that he had recently dropped an electric cable into her bath water while she was in it. And of course, there was money. Colin was in dire financial straits, but investigators did not look into the possibility of a financial motive for the deaths, including the existence of life insurance policies on both of the victims. But all of these eye-raising clues were not lost on everyone. At least 2 people expressed concerns to authorities about Trevor's injuries, and even one of the police officers shared his suspicion that Colin may be involved. But none of it was enough to combat the word of the charming, respected local dentist with his strong Christian ties and reputation. In addition to all of the clues that were ignored, the investigation suffered several other procedural lapses. There was no scene log and no sketches or measurements were taken. The deaths were ruled as self-inflicted, the case was closed, and paperwork was filed and subsequently lost. They had done it. Colin Howell and Hazel Buchanan had gotten away with murdering their spouses. Once Colin had come to the conclusion that his marriage was over, he devised a plan. One that would rid him of the spouses that were standing in the way of his romance, as well as net him the cash he needed to get out of debt. Ever since he had discovered the note Leslie left behind following her ingestion of the pills, he envisioned how he could incorporate it into his grand plan. He finally shared that grand plan with Hazel in the middle of 1991, explaining that the future of their relationship depended on them ending their marriages, but not through divorce. Hazel agreed. Then, on the night of May 18th, the day of his youngest son's 2nd birthday, Colin set his plan into motion. He wedged a hockey stick underneath his children's bedroom door to prevent them from leaving their rooms. Then he waited until Leslie fell asleep in the lounge of their home, which was where she normally slept given the collapse of their marriage. Earlier that day, Colin had cut off the ends of a baby bottle and used the remaining portion to connect a hose to their car's exhaust pipe. Once Leslie was asleep, he retrieved the connected hose from the garage, let it into the lounge, started the car engine, and left the room. But then, concerned that the fumes were not filling the room quickly enough, he came back into the room and tucked the hose under his wife's blanket close to her face. As the fumes began to take effect, Leslie stirred and started to wake up, calling out the name of their eldest son, Matthew. Colin acted swiftly. Holding her down, he pulled the blanket over her head and held it there, making sure she had no opportunity to escape the lethal gas. After Leslie stopped moving and Colin was certain she was dead, he turned off the car engine. He then placed her body in the trunk of their car and called Hazel and said, "I'm finished with Leslie. Is everything ready?" Colin then drove through the darkness to Hazel's house. Prior to that night, Ian provided Hazel the sedative to give to Trevor before he arrived. She did. She had crushed the pills and mixed them into a tuna sandwich for him. He quickly became drowsy and went to bed after eating it. She then made sure that their children were asleep and let Colin know that Trevor was sedated. Colin arrived at their home and backed the car into the garage. He proceeded to Hazel's bedroom, where Trevor was in a deep sleep. Like he had just done at his own home, he took a prepared hose from the garage, ran it through and positioned it near Trevor's mouth. Confident in his ability to overpower the heavily sedated Trevor, Colin did not restrain him. He started the car, allowing the carbon monoxide to flow through the hose and into Trevor's wounds. But like Leslie, Trevor began to stir, prompting Colin to jump on him and hold the hose in place. Despite the sedative and the carbon monoxide exposure, the seasoned police officer fought the struggle intensified, with both men wrestling on the floor, the hose spewing toxic fumes into the room. Colin, momentarily dizzy from inhaling the fumes himself, managed to regain control. He forced the hose back into Trevor's mouth, pulling a blanket over his head and pinning his arms down as he watched Trevor succumb to the gas and die. Hazel stood on the other side of the closed bedroom door during the entire ordeal, according to her, covering her ears. After ensuring Trevor was dead, Colin changed Trevor out of his pajamas and into the clothes Hazel had laid out. Then he placed him in the car next to Leslie's body. Hazel's next role was to clean up the evidence. She cut the hose into sections and burned them in the fireplace. Colin didn't come away from the attack unscathed. Even though he didn't inhale a fatal dose of the carbon monoxide, he did have some of the nausea and dizziness that exposure can cause. He stumbled outside for fresh air, but couldn't afford to rest. He still had a lot of work to do. He was no stranger to concealing his wrongdoings, but he needed this cover-up to be perfect. He was responsible for handling the bodies, and Hazel was responsible for taking care of the scene, including burning the hose in the fireplace, cleaning the floor, and washing the bed linen. Colin had worn surgical gloves, but he knew how trace evidence could be left behind, so he insisted on a thorough cleaning. He drove the bodies to the empty cottage that had belonged to Leslie's recently deceased father. There, he arranged Trevor's body in the driver's seat, and Leslie's in the trunk, positioning her with headphones on and family photos beside her to make it appear as though she had died peacefully, listening to music. He also left the old note that Leslie had written back at their home, confident that he could use it later to support his cover-up. He then connected a vacuum cleaner hose to the car's exhaust, and ran it into the vehicle, turned on the engine, closed the garage, and left the scene, hoping that it would look like the two distraught spouses had made a pact to end it all together. Then, he retrieved a bike that he had previously hidden nearby and rode it home. Given the official ruling on Trevor and Leslie's deaths, their surviving spouses were ready to collect. Between Leslie's life insurance, will, and an endowment from her father's estate, Colin collected a total of about £414,000, equivalent to about $575,000, more than enough to solve his financial problems. Hazel received £130, or about $180,000 from insurance, as well as subsequent payouts from her husband's police pension. After their spouses' deaths, the surviving murderers took about a 6-week break from their relationship, then secretly resumed it. But it wasn't the same. Hazel was racked with guilt, to the point of struggling to be intimate with Colin. But once again, Colin comes through with a solution. Unwilling to let their romance cool off after everything he had done to be with her, Colin suggested using nitrous oxide, also known as laughing gas, to help Hazel relax. While nitrous oxide is intended to be inhaled in dental and medical settings to relax patients, Colin used it to allow him to be intimate with Hazel without any inhibitions. And he didn't stop there. Recognizing Hazel's growing discomfort, he introduced a more powerful sedative, often used before surgeries. Under that sedative, Hazel would have been incapacitated, classifying Colin's actions toward her during that state as assault. The couple's relationship deteriorated to the point where Hazel began refusing to engage with Colin while she contemplated her next steps. So, it was time for Answer Man Colin to put his thinking cap on again. The solution this time, patience. He decided to assault his patients. Since the sedatives were so effective on Hazel, why not use them to assault his patients, of which he had a plentiful supply? He began administering the powerful pre-surgery sedative to female patients before dental procedures, then groping them while they were sedated and defenseless. Many of his victims were unaware that they had been assaulted due to the memory loss caused by the sedative. But some of them were aware, and they spoke out. At least 6 women came forward with allegations against Colin, highlighting his pattern of abuse. Then, in 1996, 5 years after their spouses' deaths and fully out in the open with their relationship, Hazel ended their relationship. The two parted ways and moved on. Hazel went on to meet and marry another police officer, David Stewart, in 2005. They lived in a luxury home outside of Coleraine, where she was a regular in the police community's social scene. It was common to see shots of her in glamorous ball gowns captured by the local press at charity dinners, and Colin moved on as well. Within a year of his breakup with Hazel, the 37-year-old dentist and father of 4 married his second wife, Kyle Jorgensen, just 5 months after meeting her at a Bible study class. She was a 30-year-old former waitress and divorced mother of 2, who had recently moved from America to Ireland after a violent 3-year marriage to her first husband. The couple merged families, and within the year, Kyle was pregnant with her first son, Eric. Then, when Eric was just a few months old, Colin decided that it was time to tell Kyle about his past. As she was feeding her new baby in the kitchen, he confessed to murdering his first wife and his lover's husband. He also divulged that he was currently having another affair. Kyle was initially horrified and urged Colin to turn himself in for the murders, which he considered. But after talking it through, they decided that for their 7 children, it would be best to keep the family together. They agreed to stay quiet, but Colin's revelation still didn't sit well with Kyle. She asked a church friend what she should do if her husband had done something, not fully disclosing what that something was. The man dismissed her concern and replied, "I don't want to hear it. It's before the cross. You shouldn't tell on other people before that time in their life," referring to the teaching that the sins you've committed before finding God are forgiven. Meanwhile, despite Colin claiming that the affair he confessed to was over, he continued to lead a double life behind Kyle's back. Amidst it all, his dental practice and reputation continued to thrive. He expanded into cosmetic dentistry and implants, both highly lucrative fields, with the public unaware of the good dentist's past and current evil acts. Over the next few years, Colin and Kyle had 4 more children together, bringing Colin's total to 9 and 11 between them. Colin's recent professional success enabled him to buy a property in Florida. He was even able to invest nearly £400,000 in a buried treasure investment where gold was reported to be buried in Philippine caves by Japanese troops in the 1940s. The investment was so promising that Colin began fraudulently swindling money through his practice, claiming to perform procedures he didn't actually perform. He even sold his share in his 2 dental practices to add to his investment. It seemed that all his wrongdoings of the past were behind him, but not forever. In April of 2007, Colin received devastating news about his eldest son, 22-year-old Matthew. Matthew, who was studying for a semester in St. Petersburg, Russia, was calling out to a friend over the railing of his apartment building, and losing his grip, he tragically fell 4 stories onto the concrete below, killing him. Colin was stricken with grief. Shortly after that, he learned that the large buried treasure investment that he had poured all of his and others' money into was a scam. In a desperate attempt to try to salvage some of his investment, he traveled to the Philippines, but all he received was a box containing 2 gold bars worth about £30. He returned to Northern Ireland and explained to Kyle that he had lost £350,000 in a failed scheme, which included savings for their children's education. And for good measure, he threw in the admission that following Matthew's death, he had renewed his old affair. And, since he was sharing, he included that he was assaulting women while they were sedated at his clinic. The affair admission would be Colin's 3rd strike, counting his 2nd affair that he had fessed up to back in 2003. Outraged, Kyle kicked the murderous serial adulterer out of the house. Penniless and humiliated, Colin continued working as a dentist, but having lost nearly everything, he began to believe that God was punishing him for his past sins. He was convinced that his misfortune would continue until he made things right. And so did Kyle. In January 2009, a month after kicking him out and 10 years after he told her about his murders, Kyle called the church elders to her home to meet with Colin. Kyle begged Colin to confess, telling him, "The truth will set you free." He confessed the killings to the elders, admitting both he and Hazel's involvement. Stunned to learn that Colin was not the upstanding citizen and devout Christian that they believe he was, the elders convinced him to turn himself in, which he did. Shortly afterward, Hazel was also taken into custody. After having gotten away with murder for nearly 2 decades, the truth finally caught up to them. Despite Colin's confession, he pleaded not guilty to the charges, and so did Hazel. Before Colin's trial begins, Kyle filed for divorce and returned to her native America with her 7 children. Having known about the murders for a decade and not reported it, it was unclear whether she would be charged or called for questioning again. Then, just days before Colin's trial was set to begin in 2010, in a surprise move, he changed his plea to guilty for the 2 murders. Later that year, he also pleaded guilty to indecently assaulting 3 women patients. He was facing 14 other assault-related charges reported to have taken place over a span of 10 years, but he denied those. On December 3, 2010, Colin Howell was sentenced to life in prison for the murders with a minimum of 21 years. A few months later, he received an additional 5.5 years for the sexual assaults to be served concurrently with his life sentence. He did not face trial for the reported rape of Hazel. In 2011, Hazel, now going by her married name of Hazel Stewart, stood trial for 2 counts of murder. Present on one side of the courtroom were the children of death. Hazel's children also attended. Despite losing their father, they chose to stand by their mother. Throughout the trial, Hazel claimed that she was manipulated by Colin and that he was the principal architect of the murders. She claimed that she was not an active participant, but rather a passive victim. However, the prosecution laid out a detailed account of the events leading up to and following the murders. They showed how Hazel was not a bystander, an active conspirator, outlining how she provided Trevor with a sedative-laced sandwich, guided Colin to the bedroom where Trevor slept, and disposed of the evidence. Most of the details were provided by testimony from Colin himself, who would in turn state witness against his former partner in crime, providing detailed evidence against her. His 4 days of testimony were devastating to her defense. He described that while she may not have understood the plan as thoroughly as he did, she never asked him to stop. He said she initially didn't think they could pull it off, but eventually she fully cooperated. He said that her concern was not about the concept, but about being caught. During his testimony, he also admitted that he may have indeed flicked his wife with a live cable while she was in the bathtub prior to the final murder. He said, "I saw the opportunity to shift the balance of power in our relationship." During his court-ordered psychological exams, Colin noted how his affair is what triggered Leslie to start drinking. He said, "Before the affair, she wasn't like that. She just couldn't cope with the pain I had caused with the affair." The jury also heard some of the 15 taped interviews that Hazel had with investigators when she was first arrested. In them, she outlines her specific roles in the crime, but still claims she was coerced. She described, "Maybe I was easy prey. He's a very calculating person, a very clever guy. I'm not very bright, unfortunately, but he was a step ahead of me the whole time. I thought, if I say something against this, he'll kill me." Throughout the tapes, she changes her account of the events at least 3 times. She also recounted how Colin would give her laughing gas in his dentist's chair, and how he once gave her too much so that he could test the limits of how much he could give. Colin confirmed that he had indeed drugged Hazel in an experiment to test the doses that he would later use on their murder victims. Then he had sex with her while she was unconscious. In March 2011, the jury took just over 2 hours to find 48-year-old Hazel Stewart guilty of both murders. Following the verdicts, police acknowledged that the initial police investigation was deeply flawed, with key evidence overlooked, crucial witness statements not examined, and more. They issued a formal apology to the families of the victims, noting that they regretted the delayed justice and prolonged suffering that their failings caused. Police also conducted a review of their procedures to ensure that sudden deaths undergo a thorough investigation in the future. In light of the true nature of Leslie and Trevor's deaths, the death of Leslie's father, which occurred just 12 days before Leslie and Trevor's murders, was called into question. Colin had used Leslie's father's death as a key point in the cover-up of the murders, stating that Leslie was distraught over his death, so it was reasonable to speculate whether her father's death was also orchestrated by Colin as the initial step of his bigger plan. Colin denied killing Leslie's father, and since the body was cremated, something that Colin insisted that Leslie wanted for her father, there was no way of exhuming it to gather enough evidence to charge Colin. Leslie's brother speculated that Colin may have found out about £212 in Leslie's bank account and hatched the murder plan to get his hands on it. Leslie's relatives believed that her father may have secretly given her those funds to help her escape Colin in the months before she was killed. Leslie had told a friend that she wanted to make sure her husband did not get any money that her father left her, stating that that money is for her and the kids, not for him. For 4 years, Cal remained under investigation for not reporting the murders during the 10 years that she was aware of them, but she was never charged. Authorities maintained that there wasn't sufficient evidence to provide a reasonable prospect of conviction. Colin Howell is currently serving a life sentence in HMP Magabury, a high-security prison in Northern Ireland. Now 64 years old, his involvement in religious activities and knowledge of the Bible has gained him trust and respect among the population. Described as a model prisoner by prison staff, they say that he is consistently polite and mannerly, and always refers to officers as sir. They did, however, note that he likes to think he's not one of the regular criminals. They reported how he applied to be the jail's dentist for all the prisoners, but since he's a convicted murderer and no longer has a license to practice, he was turned down. They said he was furious. They noted that while the prison does have a lot of inmates with dental problems, Colin Howell was not the answer. One prison worker noted how Colin suffered a few spankings when he was returned to the general population after temporarily being moved away for his own safety. Colin was also reported to have gotten into an altercation with one of his inmate friends. Both Colin and the other inmate, who was serving a 22-year sentence for rape and murder, were both known for spreading the gospel to other inmates. They were getting along just fine until they fell out after Colin accused the other inmate of scratching his R. Kelly CD. Colin Howell will be eligible for parole no earlier than the year 2030, at which time he will be 72 years old. Hazel Stewart's life in prison has been less publicized, but she continues to serve her time in Highbank Prison in Belfast. In 2013, she appealed her conviction for the murder of Leslie Howell, but it was dismissed. She also tried to appeal the conviction of the murder of her husband, but upon the advice of her counsel that the appeal was groundless, she dropped it. In 2021, her lawyers were planning to challenge the decision to not prosecute Colin Howell for raping her. If they do end up challenging that decision, and if she were to win, they may appeal her conviction again, arguing that because she was raped, she was not in a fit state of mind to know what she was doing when she participated in the murders. Barring any such successful appeal, she will be eligible for parole no sooner than 2029. This widely publicized case from Northern Ireland was the subject of a book titled Let This Be Our Secret, written by Belfast journalist Derek Henderson. It was later adapted into a Northern Irish television miniseries called The Secret, which aired first on ITV, then on Netflix in 2016. It was a mini-series that Colin was able to watch from his prison cell. According to prison officials, once he completed his chores, drank his tea, and said his prayers, the 57-year-old settled in to watch the show on the 16-inch color TV in his cell. His lawyer disputed that claim and said Colin had not watched the series, but prison insiders insisted that he reveled in the production, feeling that the story moved him up the notoriety chain in jail. They said that he tries to come off as modest, but they know exactly what he's like. And that's it for this case. What are your thoughts about Colin Howell? Always ready with solutions that had no limits, and both Hazel and Kyle, who were somehow able to sleep next to Colin every night and not wonder whether they might someday meet the same fate should they ever become Colin's inconvenience. Let us know your thoughts in the comments about this clumsy and arrogant murder that somehow still resulted in the killers getting away with it for nearly 20 years. Case 2. Carol and Stephen Baxter were a loving couple living out their golden years in the seaside village of West Mersey, a town in Essex, England. The couple married in 2000 and had 2 children together, Elena or Ellie and Harry. Carol also had 2 other children from 2 previous marriages. In 2012, the couple came up with an innovative idea, one that they saw a clear need for, but no one fulfilling it. With the ever-growing popularity of standing quadrant showers, they found that no one was making bath mats to suit them. Carol wrote on her LinkedIn page, "You probably purchased a mat to step out onto that isn't quite right. Your mat is either rectangular, square, or even circular, and you just wish somebody had thought of designing one, especially for you and your curved shower." Mat is where Casplash came in. Carol and Stephen founded the company, which sold curved bath mats that fit snugly around modern corner or curved showers, along with matching towels. Carol was the managing director, and Stephen, who designed the rugs, was a fellow director of the company. Stephen was also a top executive at Jones Lang LaSalle, a multi-billion-pound global real estate firm founded in the UK with offices in 80 countries. He was the global lead of operational risk and assurance. In 2015, 3 years into the business, the couple was working hard to promote Casplash and found itself in need of some technical expertise. Through a mutual friend of Carol's, the couple was introduced to an IT consultant named Luke DeWitt. Luke was a slightly weird and nerdy, but friendly young man. He created a website for Casplash and would continue consulting for the business on and off for the next 10 years. During that time, in 2021, Luke's father died. The Baxters had sympathy for the young man and began to take the visibly lonely Luke into their home more often, even inviting him to their family's birthday meals. He was especially close to Carol, who he would accompany on walks and to the gym. They all became very close to the point where Luke described himself as the couple's adopted son. The couple was thriving, and by 2023, 64-year-old Carol and 61-year-old Stephen were self-made millionaires. They began planning how they would spend their golden years together, taking early retirement and downsizing from their 5-bedroom, million-pound home to a bungalow. Carol planned to start taking art classes, and Stephen planned to play more golf. But the art classes and golf would never happen. On April 9, 2023, an Easter Sunday, Carol and Stephen's daughter, 22-year-old Ellie Baxter, had not heard from her parents for 2 days and became worried. She went to their home to check on them and noticed that the shades were still closed, unusual for the middle of the day. She knocked, but no one answered. So, she went around the back to see if she could get a look inside. She could. She could see her parents in the conservatory or sunroom, slumped in their armchairs but not moving. Something was definitely wrong. She immediately called Luke, who lived just a few streets down, and he rushed right over. Hearing Ellie shouting, "They're not moving," and hitting the windows, a neighbor came to help and gave her a hammer to break a window and get in. Ellie called 999, the UK's emergency line, and she, her partner, and Luke entered. Ellie had her 1-year-old son with her as well. On the 999 call, Ellie grew increasingly distressed as they entered the house. She tells the handler, "We need an ambulance right now. She's been poisoned, and my mom's not very well. They're poisoned. They're dead. They're frozen. They're so cold." With Ellie becoming overcome by what she's seeing, Luke takes over the call. "I need to come out, guys. It's their daughter, you can hear." "Yeah, it's absolutely fine. I'm going to go and get help for you now. Just get on the phone with me. Just tell me exactly what's happened and let me know, please, just so we can all go to bed safe." Well, we just turned up to the house and they hadn't really heard from anyone for about a day and a half. So we came round and their daughter got here first, and then they got around to the back, saw through their conservatory that they were sitting in their armchairs not moving, and we smashed the window to get in. I'm all ready to help you now. Just stay on the phone. Thank you. Thank you. Anytime we can wrap up soon. I need to go and be with my daughter. I appreciate it. I'm trying to be as quick as I possibly can, just so I can make sure we've got a helpful response. They've been really well, okay? I'll leave you in the first response hands, okay? All the best now. Thank you. Thank you. No worries. Bye. Emergency responders arrived, but it was too late. The Baxters were dead. Everyone was baffled. Both Ellie and the responders immediately suspected carbon monoxide poisoning, but the fire department quickly ruled that out, as well as any other dangerous toxins. With Ellie still understandably grief-stricken and distraught, police speak with Luke to try to get an account of what happened. "Anna, you say you last saw them on Friday. I got home just before 8, so that's when I left. And me and Steve were just talking about work and the business. Carol can't work anymore. Last year, she's not been able to do anything. So we were just having a chat, but he didn't really feel up to it. I was going to come back tomorrow and check on them again. I'm used to checking on them. They're always popping in, because they wanted this weekend. Then Ellie called me this morning, and I was always, well, I think we're both a bit uneasy. As you would be, understandable. Eddie popped by first, saw the blinds were still down, and immediately panicked. I was meeting them anyway, but Marcus called me, just giving me that they're in the chairs that we're going to be able to buy. So I literally ran from home to here to contact Daniel. Okay. And as soon as I got here, they just smashed the back window to get in. Okay, fair enough. So you last saw them alive on Friday. And have you seen them today? Did you go in to see them yourself? I've been in there, yeah. And I went upstairs, and the paramedic asked me to get all Carol's medication this year. She's got a low, because sometimes she'll have various things over the years, all the various operations she's had. I don't know if any of it's valid, but I know Carol. That's right. Yeah, they like to know what people take, gives them an idea of what they're suffering from. She's actually taken. There's quite a few she might take. She has every morning levothyroxine. But sometimes she forgets, and she can take it 6 or 7 times. I know that's a real issue. She doesn't know. She doesn't know. She's taken it loads of times. His statement about Carol forgetting whether she has taken her medication, leading to her sometimes taking it 6 or 7 times, was worrisome. At the beginning of July, over 2 months after the couple was found dead, an autopsy was performed. It revealed the couple had been poisoned. Stephen with a lethal dose of fentanyl, and Carol with lethal doses of fentanyl and promethazine. Fentanyl is a synthetic opioid similar to morphine, except that it's up to 100 times more potent. In the UK, fentanyl is not part of a nationwide opioid epidemic like it is here in the US. In the UK, a prescription for fentanyl can only be obtained in very serious cases where it is warranted. In addition to the autopsy results, authorities also learned that a year prior to the couple's deaths, multiple tacks were found in Carol's digestive tract after being admitted to the hospital for severe abdominal pain. Based on that finding, along with the autopsy results, a murder investigation is launched. Police arrested the 3 people who were closest to the crime: Ellie, her partner, and Luke. Police said that the arrests were to gain comprehensive accounts from them, and that they continue to remain open-minded as to how the couple died. Meanwhile, they continue investigating. They learn more about Carol and the reason she was taking all those medications Luke alluded to. She had been extremely sick for over 18 months leading up to her death. She suffered from Hashimoto's disease, an autoimmune condition that causes fatigue, difficulty thinking, and more. The illness was debilitating and sometimes mysterious. She was on numerous medications and health supplements to try to combat her illness and symptoms, but she struggled to cope with them and wasn't getting better. According to Ellie, her dad became lonely as a result, with her mom suffering from dementia-like or stroke-like symptoms, including struggling to eat and to stay awake, and sometimes unable to speak or properly open her eyes. But it wasn't for lack of support. Carol had accumulated a wide support network that was there for her every step of the way. She had her family, of course, her husband and their 4 children, and there was Luke, who, although only officially scheduled to visit for work 3 days a week, was there every day to help with her care. And there were numerous other people who made themselves available as well. Cheryl was a friend and a huge support to Carol, someone she could talk to. The two of them both had the same disease, so they could relate to each other. They regularly messaged back and forth with support, encouragement, and a little tough love. At one point, when Cheryl found out that Carol was washing dishes, she sent her a message, severely reprimanding her, telling her, "You are completely ignoring the rules. I had you down as a smart lady, I really did. Play by the rules and stop trying to do things. You are seriously ill." Then there was Cheryl's sister, Jenny, who was a theater producer. Jenny not only supported Carol, but also supported her daughter, Ellie, who had aspirations of being a singer. She worked on arranging for Ellie to participate in a singing competition in London. Like Cheryl, Jenny became someone that both Carol and now Ellie could trust. Eventually, Carol also began working directly with Cheryl's doctor, Dr. Andrea Bowden, a Florida-based doctor who specialized in their Hashimoto disease. The doctorate was a huge resource for Carol. Dr. Bowden would direct Carol's medical treatment, including taking numerous supplements, which Luke was a master at administering since he was there helping out daily. Carol affectionately referred to him as her mixologist, with him whipping up smoothies that contained the doctor-recommended nutrients. Luke would take videos of Carol to send to Dr. Bowden to document her condition. Sadly, she seemed to be deteriorating rather than improving, and Carol had others in her network of support, including other patients of Dr. Bowden like Linda, who encouraged Carol to do what Andrea says, or you will have other problems. And Marnie Pantry, who told Carol, "I have my life back. Listen to Andrea. Stop fighting it. I do not know what you are going through, only that we are very similar, and you are stuck in the same phase I was 8 months ago. I was ill, and one day I finally listened." With the ease of communicating via messages, all communications took place either via email or WhatsApp. Carol was, however, finally able to connect with Jenny via phone after only messaging for such a long period of time. "Hi, Carol. It's Jenny. It's Cheryl's sister." "Yes. Oh, so nice to finally speak to you after all these messages we've been doing." The network of those women and others helped Cheryl and her family work through Carol's devastating ordeal. With the autopsy results leading to landing the 3 possible suspects in custody, police moved swiftly to identify the culprit or culprits of the couple's poisoning. And it doesn't take them long. They quickly hone in on several findings that begin to make the culprit obvious, starting with the will. Subsequent searches of the Baxter home led to the discovery of both open and unopened fentanyl patches and a will. The 5-part will suspiciously name the Baxters' dear friend Lou DeWitt as the director and person of significant control of Casplash, and explicitly gave him control of making all business-making decisions. It stated that when their daughter Ellie, or Elena, turned 30, the directorship would split 50-50, but that Elena could not remove DeWitt from his directorship. It also stated that a grant of £60,000 should be given to the company out of the couple's estate to be used for new ideas. That will was drastically different than the original will that the couple submitted to their lawyer 2 years prior. The original will stated that the Baxters' money would be left to their 4 children. And according to the attorney who drafted the original, the new will did not read as a legal document, and that there was no logic to how it was laid out. He said that it appears whoever drafted this document has no idea how a business is run. With the discovery of the clearly fake will, police release Ellie and her partner without charge. They zero in on the person who has suddenly shifted to gain from the will, Luke DeWitt. And the more they dig, the more they find. With DeWitt leaving the Baxters' home at 7:55 p.m. on the Good Friday before they were found, that made him the last person to see the couple alive. Based on data from her pacemaker, Carol's time of death was somewhere between 11 a.m. and 2 p.m. the following day. That meant that it took a full 15 or more hours for a poisoned Carol to die after DeWitt left the home. Stephen's time of death was not able to be determined. After DeWitt poisoned the couple, and they were unconscious, he turned to Carol's iPad, which was open to her banking application, and transferred £6,000 from the couple's bank account to Casplash, the company he had just willed himself access to. When police arrested DeWitt, he had both unopened and opened packs of fentanyl patches right in his backpack. He had access to them since the death of his father, who had a prescription due to the pain he had from cancer, but when asked about them, DeWitt said they belonged to his granddad, who died a few weeks prior, and that he intended to return them to the pharmacy. They also searched his home. DeWitt had grown up in West Mercy, and he and his mother still lived together in the town, just a few streets over from the Baxters. The mother and son shared a bedroom. It contained 2 single beds. Hers had pink bedding, his blue. In their bedroom, police discovered even more fentanyl patches. They also discovered a box. It contained tacks similar to the ones found in Carol's abdomen just over a year prior to the murder. Inside the same box were what was described as a treasure trove of medicine capsules, which DeWitt had opened and emptied out. Authorities speculated that the capsules were the medium DeWitt used to administer the tack to Carol in an attempt to murder her back then. They traced DeWitt's purchase of the tacks to right before doctors found tacks in Carol's abdomen. Authorities wondered how this person was able to pull off deceiving such a smart, savvy couple for such a long period of time. They got their answer when they confiscated DeWitt's devices. They revealed that all of the confidants, all the resources, all the medical advice Carol was getting, was made up, as were the people delivering them. All of them. Lou DeWitt had fabricated them all. From Cheryl, to her sister Jenny, to Dr. Bowden, and 20 other distinct fake personas that would communicate with Carol and sometimes her daughter. They were all contrived by DeWitt. There were supporters, medical professionals, fellow sufferers, and more. Some were intended to discredit Carol's real doctor, others were created to solicit trust, and others were intended to isolate Carol from her children. As with any effective scam, the web of deception was elaborate and extensive. DeWitt had even created a WhatsApp group of fabricated fellow Hashimoto's sufferers who would exchange ways of combating their disease. With all communications happening through messaging, it was all that the Baxters had to go on. They often attempted to connect in person with the people they grew close to. They would arrange meetings, but they would never happen, including one such arranged meeting that led the couple to drive 3 hours to meet one of the friends, and of course no one showed. At one point, the facade became too hard to maintain through messages alone. Remember when Ginny finally made her audio debut? I'm sure it surprises exactly no one that the recording was actually DeWitt practicing impersonating one of his made-up female personas. It later wouldn't surprise a jury either, which laughed out loud when the recording was played in court. Investigators would also discover another recording he had made to perfect that persona. And while the impersonations sounded ridiculous, their intent was cold and heartless. The fictitious Florida-based Dr. Bowden recommended remedies like kale and flaxseed smoothies, as well as generally advising Carol on what she could and could not do. One piece of advice was for Carol to distance herself from her family. The fictitious doctor wrote, one of the final personas DeWitt created was a Dr. Alan Mandel. Mandel was the persona who recommended a liver detox drink that authorities believed DeWitt used to administer the final lethal dose of drugs. The treatment was made to sound so beneficial that even Stephen agreed to it, along with Carol. He warned them that the drink would not taste nice. Law enforcement had their man, but who was Luke DeWitt? According to those who knew him, he had no interest in his social life, played a lot of video games, and occasionally attended Comic-Con. After drifting between odd jobs at age 22, DeWitt reportedly started up a website design company with a friend. But according to another friend, it was never a proper company, and all they succeeded in doing was creating a logo. Friends were shocked to hear of his arrests, with one friend incredulously checking to see if there could possibly be another Luke DeWitt, figuring they could not be talking about the mild-mannered person he knew. DeWitt was said to volunteer at a soup kitchen and not have a violent bone in his body. His call-in reserve character was clear, even back during his already incredibly polite arrest. so we can interview about the offense, enable any forensics that we need to be done, interrupt any co-defendants, and prevent any loss of damage or any evidence. So we'll be taking you up to chapter custody, and then there'll be a process from there, mate, right? Have you been arrested before? No. Never been arrested, no. No. The process will be explained throughout, obviously with the limited information we've got at the moment, but anything further will be explained throughout the investigation, alright? But one friend, although in agreement about DeWitt's nonviolent demeanor, speculated his motivation may be rooted in his desire to get back at everyone who had written him off, perhaps striving to commit the perfect crime. The friend commented that DeWitt thought he was cleverer than most people, and was sometimes frustrated that friends had moved on to better things. But while his nonviolent demeanor and unassuming character may have deceived everyone, it made no difference to the circumstance he currently faced. It was clear that over a period of at least 18 months, Luke DeWitt had systematically poisoned and brainwashed Carol Baxter, then viciously murdered her and her husband. And while Carol was indeed diagnosed with Hashimoto disease by her actual doctor, she was being properly treated for her condition. But once DeWitt became involved, he and his fake personas persuaded her to ignore her real doctor's advice, and her health began to decline. The personas convinced her that her poor health was caused by the disease and recommended various useless treatments. In reality, her debilitating symptoms were not due to her Hashimoto's, but were in fact due to her long-term exposure to the drug promethazine, which she was encouraged was good for her by the personas. It was determined to be one of the cruelest ways to poison someone, producing symptoms like dementia, Parkinson's, and possibly a stroke. As the investigation continued, authorities learned of the extensive lengths DeWitt had gone to pull off his devastating charade. Although DeWitt claimed to have a master's degree in computer science from the University of East Anglia, according to the university, they had no record of him having ever attended. And in order to gain sympathy, DeWitt had lied to the Baxter family about his own health. He told them he had cancer, and he would complain about constant headaches and fatigue. Ellie would later realize how that was yet another form of DeWitt's emotional manipulation and deceit. To pull off the 20 fake personas he'd invented, DeWitt had accumulated a whopping 80 separate devices. When he was arrested, he had 4 phones actually with him, and the remaining phones, iPads, laptops, and more were found in his home and job. They'd all be analyzed to uncover the elaborate web of deceit that he had spun. It wasn't until after DeWitt was arrested and Ellie stopped receiving messages from Jenny and Dr. Bowden that she finally discovered that it was DeWitt who was behind all of them. He had continued the facade with Ellie for months after the murders, including supporting her at her parents' funeral, even as he continued to correspond with her through his false identities. She stated, "I was absolutely beside myself, confused. Who do I trust now?" And then there was the unthinkable. DeWitt had positioned a mobile phone in the Baxter's conservatory, then streamed live footage from that mobile phone to a home security app on his phone. It allowed him to watch the couple helplessly dying in real time. Authorities believe that DeWitt returned to the Baxter home after poisoning them to remove any incrementing evidence like the contaminated glasses containing the fentanyl. As he approached the Baxter home, neighbors observed him looking at his phone, presumably to check on the state of his poisoned victims. On DeWitt's phone, police found photos of the couple slumped in their armchairs. One of the photos was time-stamped April 7th at 5:14 p.m., 2 hours before DeWitt left their home. They would be found in the exact same position as they were in that photo 2 days later. So what could possibly have led such a seemingly nonviolent person to commit such a heinous act against a couple who willingly took him in and treated him like family? Since he had written himself into their will, transferred funds to his control, and even stolen some of Carol's jewelry. On the surface, it appeared that his motivation was financial, but authorities and analysts believed differently. Based on findings, it became clear to law enforcement that DeWitt's satisfaction actually came from the control that he had over Carol's life. He enjoyed watching her declining health and derived pleasure from deciding whether they would live or die. The couple's son, Harry, wrote about how he was saddened as he looked back at videos where his mother was acting strangely, and he could see DeWitt in the background, giggling and smiling, because he knew that he was the one responsible for inflicting her pain. And while authorities could not prove definitively how long DeWitt had been plotting to kill the couple, they speculated that it may have been hastened toward the end. Ellie reported that despite any close relationship the couple had with DeWitt, by the end of 2022, they were irritated by him. She said that he was showing up at their home nearly every day, and they were annoyed by his intrusiveness. She said they had even discussed changing their passwords and parting ways with him, making a clean business break. So DeWitt may have seen the writing on the wall, since it wasn't long after that he executed his deadly plan. As many sentiments as there were for DeWitt and his demeanor, they paled in comparison to the Baxter's described character. About Stephen Baxter, his children wrote, "My dad was a strong man. There are no shortcuts in life," he would always say. He worked every day of his life. He said, "My son just fitted perfectly in his arms like my brother, and I did." He lit up, and he was excited for my new baby, a new baby he never got a chance to meet. And the definition of intelligence, a critical thinker and problem solver, and a person people could absolutely rely on. He sacrificed his life for us to live on. And when the days came where he could finally take time and retire and have time to teach me, a young man, naive and keen at the beginning of his adult life, it was stolen away by someone we all trusted the most. And about Carol Baxter, my mom was the definition of the word love. And my mom was full of life, and she always pushed me to be better. My mom lost her freedom, her will, her ability to function 2 years prior to her murder due to her illness. An illness no one could help with or understand, because it was contrived by Luke DeWitt. Luke DeWitt was charged with 2 counts of murder, 1 count of possession of a Class A drug, and 1 count of theft. He denied the charges against him. His trial began in February 2024. DeWitt arrived to his trial in a wheelchair, claiming he had a growth on his leg. He denied the prosecution access to his medical records to confirm his injury. They were certain it was fabricated to elicit sympathy for himself during a trial. Ellie herself briefly came under scrutiny again as well, having accepted a loan of £7,000 from DeWitt after her parents' death. The financial exchange invited speculation. At trial, the defense asked her whether she was involved in her parents' death in any way. She replied that she was not. She acknowledged that she and DeWitt were very close, stating, "Luke, I honestly thought was my brother, but unfortunately the evidence is stacking up and it all makes sense now." She confirmed that he had loaned her the money and stated that it did get to a point after my parents died. "I didn't have any money. My partner wasn't able to work after we were all arrested. All I'm guilty of is loving my parents," she told the court. The prosecution outlined DeWitt's months of cruel and systematic torturing, drugging, and manipulating before murdering the couple with a fatal dose of fentanyl. DeWitt's defense was to despicably claim that he was colluding with Stephen Baxter to deceive his wife. He said that he created the fake identities on the instructions of Stephen to give Carol someone to talk to and air all her grievances to. He insisted that Stephen was dictating the scene to deceive Carol, to make her feel that she was receiving help and to convince her to take her medication. But his story fell apart on cross-examination, with evidence pointing squarely and solely at DeWitt. The trial lasted 5 weeks, and on March 20th, after 8 hours into deliberation, the jury unanimously found 34-year-old Lou DeWitt guilty of the murders of Carol and Stephen Baxter. As the verdicts were read, Ellie Baxter wept, and DeWitt remained emotionless in his wheelchair. For the sentencing, the judge weighed whether DeWitt was eligible to receive a whole life order, which is a sentence where the offender would spend the rest of their life in prison without the possibility of parole or early release. In order to impose such a sentence, a crime would need to be considered sadistic. While this crime was cruel and senseless, the judge was not sure that it could properly be described as sadistic. So Lou DeWitt was sentenced to life in prison in order to serve a minimum of 37 years, instead of a whole life order. While it has not been reported which prison DeWitt was sent to, most offenders in his jurisdiction are sent to HM Prison Chelmsford, which is a Category B men's prison and young offenders institution in Chelmsford, Essex, England, built in 1825. The prison is operated by His Majesty's Prison Service. While the prison has a history of poor and unclean conditions, in the past 2 decades it has cleaned up its act. Its current issues revolve around organized gangs, violence, overcrowding, and rampant drug use, with approximately 42% of prisoners failing drug tests. Given that Luke's sentencing was less than a month before the production of this video, nothing noteworthy has been reported in that short period of time. We hope this video did justice to Carol and Stephen Baxter. It's the quiet, unassuming killers that roam among us that are the most terrifying. A detective superintendent from the Kent and Essex Serious Crimes Directorate stated that he considers DeWitt, without doubt, one of the most dangerous men I have ever experienced in my policing career. Given that DeWitt held onto his father's fentanyl packets after he died in 2021, It made authorities wonder how many more murders he planned on carrying out. Case 3. Anna Mariah Wilson was born on May 18, 1996 to parents Eric and Karen Wilson. Mariah, who was fondly known as Mo, grew up in Kirby, a small town in Vermont, along with her brother Matthew. They were a small, loving family that was active and loved the outdoors. As a child, Mariah was both driven and determined. Her mother described her as having a quiet determination, and friends noted her humble, respectful confidence. From the very beginning, Mo was a perfectionist almost to a fault. Her mother recalled how when she was in 7th grade, the head of school asked her how she was going to deal with her perfectionism. She replied that she was going to start with a clean plate. Her mother laughed, knowing her daughter meant a clean slate. But plate was so much cuter. Mo grew up near Vermont's Kingdom Trails, a mecca of trails for skiers and mountain bikers. And coming from a family of athletes, sports had a strong influence in her household. Her father, Eric, raced on the U.S. ski team, her mother, Karen, as a cycling instructor, and her aunt, Laura Wilson Todd, was a 2-time Olympic cross-country ski racer. And that was the sport that Mo gravitated toward as well. Mo attended Burke Mountain Academy, a private college prep high school in Vermont specializing in training alpine ski racers. By her sophomore year, she was ranked 3rd in the nation in giant slalom for her age group. That was the same year she tore her ACL. She recovered, and after graduating in 2014, she attended Dartmouth College and fulfilled her childhood dream of joining the Dartmouth Alpine ski team. She then promptly tore her ACL again. Believing embracing adversity, she set out to tackle her injury head-on. She began cycling to rehabilitate her ACL and soon discovered a new passion. She wanted to become a professional cyclist. She graduated with a degree in engineering in 2019, and while she joined the corporate world working at the bike designer and manufacturer Specialized, her off time was spent skyrocketing to the top of the professional cycling world. While Mo had done mountain biking when she was a young child, she had never done gravel cycling, which involves riding on unpaved roads of open gravel, dirt tracks, and other compositions. But within 3 years of mountain and gravel bike racing, she had become the winningest professional off-road cyclist in America, known in part for her vicious climbs. Mo went from having never competed at the national level to winning, or coming in second in nearly every highly competitive race she entered, unheard of for someone so new to the sport. Her trainer noted how out of the gate her numbers clocked in at World Cup levels. So in 2022, after over 2 years of COVID pandemic repercussions that allowed her more time to train, Mo took the leap, moved to San Francisco, and quit her full-time job so she could dedicate herself to professional racing. By everyone's account, Mo was poised to become the top bike racer in the country, possibly the world. But to be successful as a professional racer, you have to do more than just win. You need sponsors. Enter professional cyclist Colin Strickland. Colin was popular and well-established in the cycling community, having competed both nationally and internationally, and having raced about 10 years by that point. Born November 7, 1986, Colin Strickland grew up in Johnson City, Texas, on an organic farm. Mo met Colin Strickland in September of 2021 at a bike race in Idaho. With Colin having landed, sought-after sponsors like Red Bull, Allied Cycle Works, Raffi, and more, the two connected, with Colin advising her on the ropes of landing sponsorships. At the time they met, Colin was dating a woman named Caitlin Marie Armstrong. Born on November 21, 1987, Caitlin grew up in Livonia, Michigan, where she was known to be friendly, outgoing, and athletic. In high school, she was voted best hair for her class of 2005. After attending a community college, she went on to attend Eastern Michigan University. And after that, she entered the workforce in finance, then switched to being a real estate agent while also teaching yoga on the side as a certified yoga instructor. Caitlin and Colin had met on a dating app in 2019. They began an on-again, off-again relationship that would span 3 years. Caitlin started getting into cycling like Colin. She became addicted to it and began racing on an amateur level. While they had their ups and downs, the couple continued seeing each other. Then, after the historic 2021 winter freeze in Texas resulted in Caitlin's apartment being flooded, the couple moved in together. They also started a business together, restoring old trailers called Wheelhouse Mobile. One of the off-again periods of their relationship happened in October of that year, a month after Colin met Mo. The couple had gotten into it over Colin going on a mountain bike ride with Mo and some other female pro cyclists, and not inviting Caitlin. While Caitlin and Colin were broken up, he and Mo had a brief romantic relationship. Caitlin was also seeing other men at the time as well. Shortly after that, Colin and Caitlin decided to get back together, reverting his relationship with Mo back to a friendship and professional relationship, according to Colin. Less than a year later, on May 10, 2022, 1 week shy of her 26th birthday, Mo traveled to Austin, Texas ahead of a race that was to take place in nearby Hico, Texas, the gravel loca bike race. Mo was favored to win the race. She was staying at the apartment of her friend, Caitlin Cash. Once she was settled in, Mo contacted her friend Colin to see if he wanted to hang out. She texted him, "Do you have plans tonight?" He replied, "Want to go swimming? Maybe swimming in a beverage?" It was a plan. The two met up a few hours later. They went swimming at a local swimming pool, then headed to a place called Pool Burger for a bite. Then Colin dropped Mo back off at her friend's apartment and headed back home. But tragically, that would be the last time he would see Mo alive. That was at just after 8:30 p.m. Caitlin Cash, the friend Mo was staying with, had been out herself that evening and arrived home about 10 p.m. to the unthinkable. She found her friend lifeless on the bathroom floor. She immediately called 911 as she began CPR. But her friend had been dead over 45 minutes by that point. Police arrived, and the news of the killing began making headlines before police divulged any identities. Police are investigating a suspicious death in East Austin. This happened on Maple Avenue, near East 17th Street. Overnight, a woman called police saying she found her friend inside her house unresponsive, and there was blood near her. When officers arrived, they found the victim had gunshot wounds. EMS provided life-saving measures, but the woman later died from her injuries. Police do not know how long she was inside the home, but did call her death suspicious. It is unclear if a gun was found on scene. Cash shared that the only thing she noticed missing from the apartment was Mo's racing bike. Police would later find it discarded in a bamboo patch near the apartment. Nearby surveillance footage captured a black Jeep SUV with a bike rack on the back leaving the area that evening. Once police learned that Mo was dropped off a few hours earlier by Colin Strickland, they wanted to pay him a visit. Upon arrival at his home the next morning, in his driveway they noticed a black Jeep SUV with a bike rack on the back. They called him into the station, and he readily agreed. Once there, he was cooperative and transparent. He shared the history of he and Mo's 1 to 2 week romantic relationship the prior year. Throughout the interview, he spoke highly of Mo Wilson and her accomplishments, referring to her as the best female cyclist in the U.S. and possibly the world. In contrast, when he referred to Caitlin Armstrong, he described her as a participant at bike races while he was a racer. He reported that he asked her not to ride with him because she holds him back. He also shared how Caitlin was an extremely jealous person to the point of calling Mo multiple times, telling her that Colin was her boyfriend, not Mo's, and to stay away from him. He said her jealousy was the source of countless arguments. He shared that after he and Caitlin got back together, he continued to keep in touch with Mo professionally, but had to delete any text messages they sent, and save Mo's number under a fake name to avoid conflict since Caitlin had blocked Mo and other women's numbers from his phone in the past. He also acknowledged that he did not disclose to Caitlin that he was out with Mo the night of the murder, and even lied to her, telling her he was elsewhere. He told them that the Jeep in the driveway belonged to Caitlin, but that she was not aware of where Mo Wilson was staying. And he told police that he had bought handguns for both he and Caitlin after Caitlin had expressed concern for her personal safety while cycling alone. So now, they want to have a talk with Caitlin Armstrong. And as luck would have it, police discover that there's an outstanding arrest warrant for Caitlin Botak's treatment without paying. After her procedure, she had left her maxed-out credit card with an employee, saying she would get another card from her car, but she never returned. Police brought her in on that warrant. Caitlin Armstrong was not cooperative during the interview. Typically, innocent people are eager to share their lack of involvement and clear their names, but not Armstrong. It raised law enforcement's suspicions even further. When detectives told her that her vehicle being in the area of the murder did not look good for her, she simply nodded her head in agreement, but offered no explanation as to why her vehicle would be there. And when detectives told Armstrong that Colin and Mo had gone out together on the day of the murder, she told them, "I didn't have any idea that he saw or even went out with this girl as of recently." They suspected her involvement, but they wouldn't be able to hold her long. They were told that Armstrong's date of birth turned out to be wrong on the arrest warrant, rendering it invalid. So, without enough cause to charge her with anything else, they had to let her go. Then, within 3 days of the murder, police received calls from 2 of Armstrong's friends, both of whom said they had a conversation with Armstrong, where she was extremely angry over what she felt was a romantic relationship between Mo and Colin. One of them stated that Armstrong was to the point of shaking with anger. Both recalled her saying that she wanted to kill Mo. One of the friends recalled Armstrong saying that she had either just purchased a gun or was going to. Neither took the threat seriously, attributing it to Armstrong's extreme emotional state at the time. Despite Colin's claim that he and Mo were only involved romantically during his breakup with Caitlin, evidence and statements start pointing toward more of an on-again, off-again relationship, at least around January of 2022. That is the time frame when Armstrong had the rage conversations with her friends about Colin seeing Mo. It's when she requested a gun from Strickland. And it's when Mo sent the following text to Strickland, which included, "This weekend was strange for me, and I just want to know what's going on. If you just want to be friends seems to be the case, then that's cool, but I'd like to talk about it." The next day Colin replied, "Caitlin came along to go to a meeting about the Sprinter Spartan Hotel project." In hindsight, this was not a good idea. It appeared to law enforcement that even if Strickland saw their relationship as platonic at that time, Mo did not. What was unarguable was that Strickland's name was associated with the crime. He acknowledges much by posting a statement on social media expressing, "There is no way to adequately express the regret and torture I feel about my proximity to this horrible crime." That proximity acknowledgement triggered several of his sponsors to promptly drop him. Based on all the findings and evidence accumulated over the next few days, as well as later court testimonies, law enforcement was able to establish a clear picture of how the evening transpired. After Mo and Colin went swimming to cool off on the 80-degree day, they stopped to eat at Pool Burger, where they were seen on the restaurant's surveillance camera. Their neutral interactions appeared to reflect the strictly platonic relationship they were having at the time, just as both Mo's family and Strickland maintain. After eating, Strickland drove Mo on his motorcycle to her friend's home. He dropped her off at 8:35 p.m., then left for home. 1 minute later, he pulls over and sends a text to Armstrong. "Hey, are you out? I went to drop some flowers for Allison at her son's house up north, and my phone died. Heading home unless you have another food suggestion." Then, a minute after that, a neighbor's Ring doorbell camera captures Armstrong's black Jeep SUV pulling up to and stopping at the home where Mo was staying. Shortly after that, the Ring camera shows the Jeep leaving. Turns out Armstrong actually did know where Mo was staying. She was using a fitness app called Strava, which cyclists use to track their bike ride data. It allowed Armstrong to track exactly where Mo was staying. Armstrong also had access to Strickland's Apple laptop login and password, and police documents speculate that she may have been reading his messages and knew exactly what the pair was up to. Evidence showed that Armstrong was actually following the pair for at least part of their outing. After Strickland dropped Mo off, Armstrong made her way into the home. She then shot Wilson twice in the head, and then a few moments later, stood over her and shot her again in the heart. One of the bullets also pierced her hand, which the medical examiner determined was likely the result of Mo putting her hands up to try to shield herself. Within minutes of dropping Mo off, Strickland was seen on his motorcycle some 8 miles away, logistically clearing him from any involvement in the shooting. He had arrived home shortly after 9:21 p.m., and Armstrong was not there. When she arrived home later that evening, she was neither frazzled nor acting strange. She did, however, aggressively initiate intimacy with him, exhibiting unusually forceful behavior that he didn't mind at the time, but in hindsight, says he feels traumatized by. The next morning, when detectives visited Strickland and he learned Mo was murdered, he was shocked. When he next saw Armstrong, he told her that he had been out with Mo, but uncharacteristically, she was not upset. He asked her if her car was near the scene of the murder, like detectives had described, and she told him she was at a waxing appointment, a yoga class, and a healer. He said she vanished a couple of days later. Testing of the bike that was discarded near the home revealed DNA on its handlebars that highly likely matched Armstrong's. Law enforcement speculated that Armstrong either threw it there to make it look like a robbery, or she considered the bike a symbolic representation of Mo's livelihood or something dear to her, and she wanted to take that away from her. Law enforcement also discovered that on the night of the murder, Armstrong's phone was not connected to any cell network, indicating it was likely either off or in airplane mode. Police were confident it was intentional, noting that in this day and age, if your phone is either off or not connected to a network, you are likely either the victim of a crime or committing one. A silent phone actually speaks volumes. And ballistic testing revealed that the gun Strickland purchased for Armstrong had a strong likelihood of being the murder weapon. Armed with the evidence they gathered up until that point, on May 17th, 6 days after the shooting and 5 days after Armstrong walked out of the interrogation, a warrant for her arrest was issued for the first-degree murder of Anna Maria Wilson. But they were too late. Caitlin Armstrong had fled and was nowhere to be found. The day after her interrogation, Armstrong made plans. She sold her black Jeep to CarMax for $12,000, lending her a nice pot of cash, and that appeared to just be a supplement. According to Colin, prior to the murder, he had given Armstrong $450,000 to place into an investment account, which she had sole access to. Plenty to fund her dubious plans. Meanwhile, the U.S. Marshal Lone Star Fugitive Task Force was put into action to track down and apprehend the fleeing Armstrong. They had come to learn that the warrant they thought was invalid due to the erroneous date of birth was actually valid, and they could have indeed held Armstrong in custody on that warrant. They'd find out that she may have fled to her sister's home in New York. They tracked down her sister, Christine Armstrong, and pay her a visit. Christine shares that Caitlin had indeed been there, but was gone. The day after Armstrong sold her car, she boarded a plane from Austin to New York, headed for her sister's. She stayed a few days. Then Christine dropped her off at the Newark, New Jersey airport to board a plane back home to Austin. But later, Caitlin called Christine and told her that she decided to drive the 1,700 miles, or 2,700 kilometers back home instead of flying. Christine had not heard from her since. Authorities don't buy the driving back to Austin story. They checked for any outbound reservations for Caitlin Armstrong, but came up empty. But recalling that her sister said her passport was missing, they asked Homeland Security to check for any travelers traveling under the name Christine Armstrong. They got a match. A Christine Armstrong boarded a one-way flight to Costa Rica. Caitlin Armstrong had used her sister's passport to flee to Costa Rica. Armstrong arrived in Costa Rica with a head start evading authorities. They were tracking her down remotely based on intel, but would not arrive to the country for a month. By then, in addition to Armstrong's original murder charge, unlawful flight to avoid prosecution was added, and the for her capture was placed at $21,000. Intelligence revealed that Armstrong was staying in hostels in Costa Rica, which didn't narrow the scope very much since there are an overwhelming number of hostels in the country. They then received a tip that Armstrong had connected with an American businessman there, so they called him. He originally hung up on them thinking they were either telemarketers or scammers. But after the third attempt, they were able to identify themselves as U.S. Marshals and explain that they were looking for a fugitive named Caitlin Armstrong. They sent him a picture of her while they stayed on the line. He confirmed that that was the person he met at a yoga studio in Joko, but that it didn't look exactly like her and that she was going by the name of Beth. He told them they could find her at a particular yoga studio in Joko. Detectives arrived in Costa Rica hopeful. They canvassed the Joko area and sifted through hours of surveillance video, but they came up empty. Then they got one more lead. It was in a small village on the Pacific coast called Santa Teresa. The town was tiny and full of American tourists, many of whom to the detectives' dismay resembled Caitlin Armstrong. When detectives arrived, they immediately spotted several women who looked like they could possibly be her. It was going to be tougher than they thought. Detectives made numerous acquaintances and had people contacting them for any sightings. They encountered a local restaurant owner who hailed from New York. He knew Armstrong, but said she went by Ari, one of the numerous aliases they discovered. She had told him that she was trying to establish herself there as a yoga teacher. The restaurant owner had noticed a bandage on her face, which she told him she got from being hit by a surfboard, a reasonable cause, but they still couldn't track down Armstrong. So detectives got clever. They placed several ads, posing as a hostel looking for a yoga instructor. It seemed promising, but after a week of no responses, it was time to throw in the towel. They left the small town and returned to San Jose, preparing to head back to the States. But before they could actually head out, they got a hit on the ad. A yoga instructor who was working at a hostel in Santa Teresa said she was interested. So they rushed back to the small town and to the hostel where the yoga instructor was said to be staying. They sent in a single detective to avoid scaring her off and to get a good look at her to confirm her identity. He pretended to be a tourist, and to throw her off, he only spoke to her in Spanish. That required her to pull up Google Translate on her phone. So each time she would be reading her phone, the detective would take the opportunity to get better look at her. She had a bandage on her nose, and her lips looked bigger, but her eyes were identical. It was her. On June 29th, 43 days after Caitlin Armstrong led authorities on a manhunt, she was arrested. She would be extradited and returned to jail in Texas, where, clearly a flight risk, she would be held on a $3.5 million bond. Turns out those bandages, the swollen lips, the hard time they were having finding her, was because she had started getting plastic surgery as soon as she arrived in Costa Rica. In addition to having cut and dyed her hair brown, Armstrong spent over $6,000 on cosmetic surgery. In a locker at the hostel she was staying at, along with her sister's passport, they found a receipt for both a nose job significantly altering the appearance of her nose and a brow lift. Knowing she was a wanted woman, Armstrong tried to avoid taking the mandatory before and after photos, but the doctor performing the surgery insisted. Those photos would later be used in court, along with their conversations about her reluctance. 34-year-old Armstrong had used several fake names and stayed at various hostels to evade capture. She also began dating a man named Teal Ackerson. They went on a handful of dates, with Teal noting that Armstrong typically preferred to go to secluded places, which made sense to him once the truth was revealed. After he found out who she really was, he said that he had not recognized her from the photos put out by U.S. Marshals because she looked that different. While the spotlight was on the brazen fugitive who so callously murdered, then set out to protect her freedom in the most extreme manner possible, the focus deserved to be on the unique rising star whose life impacted so many around her. The cycling community and Mariah's friends and family mourned the tremendous loss of the woman who used whatever position she had to make a difference in whatever way she could. She wanted to do more than just win races. Trying to figure out, how can I make this more than just about that? How can I inspire people? How can I give back to the cycling community? How can I bring more people into the sport? How can I make it more inclusive? Whatever it may be, all that stuff is really important to me, I think, and I want to find meaning and purpose in cycling that goes far beyond the results. Her community mourned their unspeakable loss. The potential, the kindness, the person. On October 11, 2023, over a year after she was arrested and a few weeks before she was set to stand trial, Caitlin Armstrong escaped. She started by spending months vigorously training in her cell and throughout the facility, much of which was captured on jail video footage. Then, she executed her meticulously planned escape by faking a leg injury that would get her from her jail cell to an outside doctor's office in town. Authorities believe she chose to fake a leg injury so that she wouldn't have to wear leg restraints. Once the appointment was over and they were walking out to the transport vehicle, she managed to bolt away from the two officers who were escorting her. She ran more than a block and tried to scale a 6-foot wall, but failed. Officers were able to yank her back to the ground after her striped uniform pants slipped off while scaling the wall, revealing thermal pants underneath which she wore, planning to blend into a crowd once she escaped. The officers both sustained minor injuries to their arms and knees, resulting in a new felony charge of escape-causing bodily injury. The charge would be dismissed a few days later. Caitlin Armstrong's trial began on November 1st, 2023. Prosecutors laid out a graphic timeline of events that led up to the deadly shooting, starting with Armstrong logging into Strickland's email and Instagram accounts, all the way up to her standing over Emma Wilson as she ended her life. They outlined her time on the run, including presenting the receipt for her plastic surgery, along with evidence of Google searches like, and whether her phone could be tracked if she didn't make phone calls. All were consistent with her trying to evade capture, but defense argued that they had no direct evidence linking Armstrong to the murders. No one saw her committing the murder. Surveillance footage never showed her entering or leaving, and they argued that the ballistic evidence was not definitive. They claimed their client was trapped in a nightmare of circumstantial evidence, and that law enforcement had a theory of what happened and sought out the evidence to fit it. They argued that the reason she fled and tried to disguise her identity was that she was scared of her boyfriend. It was split. Colin Strickland was called to testify and was less than accommodating. At a time when it was time to fight for justice for M.O., he was typically uncooperative and aloof on the stand, even described as arrogant. Most reports speculate due to his cycling career being over. Apparently frustrated, there were even instances where he was rude and aggressive to media, first shoving a cameraman's camera, almost making him drop it, then later going out of his way to step on the cameraman's foot, which didn't imply any guilt, but did not present well for Strickland, personally or professionally. After a 2-week trial and 2 hours of deliberation, the jury found 35-year-old Caitlin Armstrong guilty. The same jury would convene to determine Armstrong's sentence. She had previously rejected a plea deal that would have reportedly shaved decades off of a potential life sentence if she would receive one, potentially allowing her to leave prison in her 50s or 60s. Prosecutors urged the jury to sentence Armstrong to at least 40 years in prison. The jury returned the next day, handing down a sentence of a whopping 90 years in prison, well beyond the time recommended by the prosecutors. She was also fined $10,000. She would be eligible for parole after serving at least 30 of those years in the year 2052. Her current release date is scheduled for July of 2112, when she would be 124 years old. Caitlin Armstrong is currently serving out her sentence at Dr. Lane Murray Unit, a women's prison located in Gatesville, Texas. At the making of this video, it has been 6 months since she was sentenced and little is known about her experience there. It is known that Murray is one of the many prisons in Texas, and its unbearably hot summers that does not have air conditioning. So there's that. A month after Armstrong was sentenced, her new attorney filed a motion for a new trial claiming that her previous attorneys did not present enough character witnesses to demonstrate Armstrong's traumatic childhood. The motion also claimed that she was pregnant about the time she was arrested. Her new attorney claimed that had more witnesses testified about Armstrong's traumatic life, and had they known she was pregnant around the time she was arrested, her punishment might have been less severe. The court filing did not state who she was pregnant by, what happened to the pregnancy, or any evidence supporting it. Many speculated that it was yet another attempt by the convicted murderess to avoid facing the consequences of her selfish, brutal act. Colin Strickland has essentially vanished from the public eye. After extensive research, we couldn't find any evidence of whether he continues to race or not. But regardless, any public information about him during the 6 months that have passed since he is non-existent. A few months after Mo's death, at Keens Trails in East Burke, where Mariah spent so much time biking and skiing, a trail was built in her honor, called Mariah's Ascent. The trail was a collaborative effort from numerous diverse groups of volunteers who donated hundreds of hours to honor Mo. Also to honor Mariah's memory, the Wilson family created the Mariah Wilson Foundation. They said in her journal, she wrote that her mission was to inspire to ride bikes and be active, whatever that may look like. We want to do what Mariah didn't have the chance to do. What she had said about cycling, we now say about sustaining her legacy and impact in our community. We can't not do this. We hope this video did justice to Mariah Wilson. Mo's spirit and outlook were bigger than life. She used the power of what she had at her disposal, what some might consider a limited platform, and used any advances she fought to achieve to reach out to and bring in others in a meaningful way. Case 4. Michelle Lonzinski was born and raised in New Jersey along with her older brother and sister and a younger brother. It was when Michelle was 16 and visiting her older brother in the nearby city of Walker, New Jersey, that Michelle met and began dating George Wiltsey. A year later, on August 6, 1985, when Michelle was 17, the pair welcomed a son, Timothy, who the family lovingly called Timmy. The relationship quickly crumbled, however, and 6 months after having Timmy, Michelle and the baby left and moved in with her sister in South Amboy, New Jersey. Having dropped out of high school, Michelle would take on various low-paying jobs, sometimes 2 at a time, and eventually move out of her sister's home and into her own apartment. Juggling work, her social life, and her son, Michelle struggled, relying on family and friends to help her watch young Timmy, and facing disappointment from 2 serious relationships who ultimately decided they were not ready to become stepfathers. At the beginning of 1990, when Michelle's sister and brother-in-law, who were her primary source of child care help, moved to Florida, it became even more difficult for Michelle. She was late for work often and bring Timmy with her sometimes, and once Timmy began school himself, he was also tardy or absent frequently, with the school reporting 63 tardies and 25 absences in his first year. But despite the challenges Michelle faced, she was widely regarded as a loving, caring mother who was devoted to her young son, making sure he had everything he needed, saving up enough money to send him to St. Mary's private school for his kindergarten year, and taking him on vacations and special outings whenever she could. It was on one of those outings that the sinister basis of this story began to take shape. It was Friday, May 25, 1991, the start of the Memorial Day weekend. 23-year-old Michelle Lonzinski, had made plans to take 5-year-old Timmy to the local carnival that was in town in nearby Sayville. The plan for the day was to take Timmy shopping to pick out clothes that would go with the kindergarten graduation gown Michelle had just purchased for him the week prior. Michelle planned to complete the shopping in the morning, then take both Timmy and her infant niece to the carnival in the evening. When evening came around, however, Michelle headed to the carnival without the infant niece and without calling the infant's mother. She arrived at the carnival at about 7 p.m. that evening. Sometime around 7:30 p.m., Michelle ran into her 13-year-old niece, Jennifer Blair, along with Jennifer's friend. Michelle was looking around frantically and told the girls that she'd lost sight of Timmy when she went to concessions to buy a soda. The three soon reported that the boy was missing to the Sayville police officer on site at the carnival. Recognizing the urgency of the situation, the officer called for backup. Additional officers arrived and joined in the search for the missing boy. The carnival was shut down, and despite exhaustive search efforts by the large volume of police officers, firefighters, trained dogs, and numerous volunteers that joined in, there was no sign of Timmy at the carnival or in the surrounding area. The search continued until 2 a.m., when it was finally called off for the night. The search for Timmy resumed the next morning at 5:30 a.m., with over 300 people searching the park and surrounding neighborhoods. Helicopters and diving units were deployed, leaving no stone unturned. By noon, the Sayville Police Department was convinced that given their exhaustive search, the boy was not in the park, and there was nothing further they could do. So they called off the search. Police had already searched Michelle's car the day of the disappearance in search of any clues, but found nothing. They searched it again this second day, along with her home, still finding nothing. 4,000 flyers were circulated throughout the community, and police continued to follow up on leads called into the station. Timmy's father, George Wiltsikitz, ruled out as a suspect since he was at home in Iowa at the time. Police interviewed carnival workers and visitors from that day to see if anyone recalled seeing the boy. 2 witnesses, as well as a group of teenage boys, were confident they saw someone who matched the description of Timmy before the time of the disappearance. One witness said she saw and even had a conversation with Michelle prior to the disappearance, and there was no one with her. Police searched Michelle's apartment, but like with her car, found nothing helpful. They also placed a tap on her phone to record the phone numbers of all incoming calls. They interviewed her former boyfriends, Timmy's father, and anyone of interest. Timmy's face appeared on milk cartons displaying missing children, and he was even featured on America's Most Wanted twice, including just days after his disappearance. Police are initially baffled by this child disappearing among such a large crowd of people undetected, but once they begin interviewing Michelle, they begin to form suspicions. Michelle originally reported to police that at about 7:15 p.m., she left Timmy by the side of a trailer while she went to buy a soda from concessions. Then when she turned around, he was gone. She also gave police an account of their activities prior to going to the carnival, which included playing kickball and visiting the petting zoo at Homedale Park that afternoon. However, according to the Homedale Park police, the lot where she said they parked was closed that day. Police interviewed friends and neighbors, and couldn't find anyone who had seen her son that night. The last time anyone who knew him had seen Timmy was around 11 a.m., on the morning that he disappeared. When police interviewed Michelle about a week after the disappearance on June 4th, she reiterated her account that she lost sight of Timmy when she went to purchase a soda, and that she had no idea where he was. But when they interviewed her again just 2 days later on June 6th, while she began by stating she didn't know where Timmy was, after a few hours she changed her story. She reported that she saw an older man take Timmy off of a ride and walk into a younger man. She said she yelled out, but the older man told her to stay away or the boy is going to get injured. The detectives pressed further and she said, "You wanted to hear something, so I told you." She returned later that day and said she made up the story. That would be just the beginning of a bizarre string of stories. With her changing story, police focused in on Michelle. They called her back in the very next day for further interrogation with the same detectives, and she didn't disappoint. This time her account changed even more dramatically. She told detectives that while Timmy was on a ride at the carnival, she was approached by a woman whom she knew by the name of Ellen. She said she knew Ellen because Ellen used to cash welfare checks at the bank where Michelle had worked as a teller a few years back. She claimed that she was also a go-go dancer at a local club. She said Ellen was accompanied by 2 men and a young girl and offered to watch Timmy while Michelle purchased a soda. When Michelle returned, however, Timmy was gone, as were Ellen, the two men, and the young girl. Michelle explained to detectives that she had withheld this information about Ellen out of concern for Timmy's safety. Given Michelle's ever-evolving story, police decided to enlist the help of her boyfriend, Fred Bruno. They had him secretly record her in an attempt to get her to share what truly happened, but they came up empty. Michelle told him the Ellen story of the moment, that she was currently telling police. So a week after their last interview with her, they called her in for another morning interview. Michelle began by sticking to her story about Ellen offering to watch Timmy during her soda run, but this time she added a twist. As she was walking to concessions, she said that one of the men came and put his arm around her shoulder and threatened her with a knife, telling her, "Timmy has a pretty face. You wouldn't want to do anything to mess that up. Keep walking and shut up." The detective pushed back. He told her that her account didn't make sense. If they had Timmy, why wouldn't they just take him instead of coming back to threaten her? She was already leaving Timmy with them. Why would they alert her that they were taking him? He asked her why she didn't yell out since she was in the middle of a busy carnival. She said that she was going to, but then the other man held a knife to Timmy too. The detectives weren't buying it. Otherwise, this would have been her original story. So one of the detectives devised a scheme. He tells Michelle that he believes her because they've been tracking a kidnapping ring out of Berkeley that operates exactly as she's describing. He told her they say they're going to return the child to a specific location, but tell the parents they cannot tell the police if they want to get their child back. He said he knows they have told her the same thing, and that's why she's been lying to the police. She bought it. She agreed with the detective and said they told her she might get Timothy back in a month if she did not say anything. The detective told her he needed to know the location they told her. She said it was in the woods in an abandoned building near a tree. But when he pushed for a location of the building, she clammed up. And when another detective tried to break the silence by saying she was lying, she abruptly ended the interview and stormed out, telling them to charge her or she's leaving. Detectives were even more suspicious of Michelle after that. No innocent mother concerned about finding her missing son would ever go along with such a story. She'd be interrogated 2 more times, reciting her most recent story, and typically storming out by the end before she refused to participate in any more interviews. But despite Michelle's conflicting accounts, authorities had no concrete evidence to suggest that she was involved in Timmy's disappearance. So they continued pursuing any leads until they finally caught a break. 5 months after Timmy's disappearance, a nature enthusiast schoolteacher was exploring the marshlands in the Raritan Center Business Park just across the river from Sayreville. While exploring, he came across a small Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle sneaker, which is what Timmy was said to be wearing when he went missing. The teacher was aware of that, so he brought the shoe to the Sayreville Police Department. The shoe was shown to Michelle, who told police that it did not look like her son's shoe. So the police stored it away. Meanwhile, the teacher, waiting to hear word about whether the shoe was connected to the missing child or not, grew impatient after weeks of not hearing anything back from the police. So he reported his find to a local newspaper. The shoe was a front-page story the following morning, sparking renewed interest from the FBI and triggering forensic testing. This renewed interest and media attention also triggered Michelle to call the police station and tell them that the shoe may indeed have been Timmy's. She had previously provided the shoe box that the shoes came in. The discovered shoe matched the specifications on the box. It was Timmy's shoe. Police conducted a search of the area where the shoe was found, but didn't uncover any further evidence. A few months after Timmy's shoe was found, the moment everyone hoped would never come came. Nearly 11 months after Timmy's disappearance, the FBI regrouped. They decided to re-explore every avenue they had already pursued in case they had missed something. One of the strategies was to research the marshy area where Timmy's shoe was found. And to everyone's surprise, nearly as soon as the search began, they found the matching shoe, just 30 yards from where the first shoe was found 6 months earlier. No one could answer why the shoe wasn't found during the original search. They continued searching and ultimately discovered the skull of a small child, along with 11 other bones. They also found a shovel, a pillowcase, a large loop blanket, and a few other items. Timmy's remains were so decomposed that his cause of death was not able to be determined, and dental records were needed to identify him. Detectives informed Michelle that they had found Timothy's remains. According to them, she had no visible response. The family and community were heartbroken. The findings triggered a hunt for Timmy's killer. Police interviewed Timmy's father, but ruled him out since he was nowhere near the area at the time of his disappearance. They interviewed Michelle's ex-boyfriends, but none were considered suspects. Ellen, the mystery woman, was never found despite the FBI's extensive resources and exhaustive search for her, including investigating every person named Ellen on welfare, all of whom Michelle said were not her Ellen, based on photo lineups. None of the people investigated sustained prolonged suspicion. Instead, their prime suspect was Michelle Lodzinski. Why? For starters, her ever-changing story. She also failed 2 FBI polygraph tests shortly after Timmy went missing, frequently asking the administrators how she was doing. In addition, many law enforcement officers, those close to her, and even the public felt that on several occasions Michelle didn't show appropriate emotion for the mother of a missing child, at times outright laughing. What was the time period from when you last saw Tim, and then heard about him in the sky? I had to do about 2 minutes or so, because I had to take my money out of my pocket, pay the guy, get my things back, pay him, and that's it. Okay, so within this 2-minute period, Tim disappeared. Michelle's position was that everyone is waiting to see a grieving mother on TV break down, crying hysterical, because the public, they thrive on that stuff. During a press conference where Michelle was asking for prayers for her son, reporters asked her why she had shown little to no emotion about her missing son, to which she replied, "I don't show emotion in the public, and I don't think I should have to because someone wants me to." Then there was the fund. Before Timmy's remains were found, the surrounding communities never gave up hope. Volunteers formed a fund called Friends of Timmy to raise money to help find him. Michelle initially welcomed the efforts and even sat on the fund's board. The first fundraiser was held at Timmy's Catholic school, and upon Michelle's recommendation, was a Chippendale dancer event. The event faced backlash, considered inappropriate for both a Catholic school event as well as a fundraiser to help find a missing child. Despite the backlash, Michelle insisted the next fundraiser also be a Chippendale dancer event. The board rejected the idea, and Michelle quit the board. She then had an attorney send a letter to the fund which existed exclusively to find her son, prohibiting them from using any photos or likenesses of Timmy in their efforts to find him. Another suspicious finding was that the marsh where Timmy's remains were found happened to be right behind an office park where Michelle previously worked, a fact that she failed to mention during her initial interviews. Also, a few months after Timmy went missing, Michelle took a girls' trip with a friend to the Bahamas. She was recognized by 2 off-duty state troopers, who also happened to be vacationing there. And lastly, police received an anonymous, typed letter on the day that Timmy's remains were found. It named the man responsible for Timmy's death. It claimed the man had a grudge against Michelle, and that he had asked for help killing Michelle and her little boy. Investigators noted that Michelle's name was misspelled, using only 1 L instead of 2. This immediately made law enforcement suspect Michelle herself of writing the letter, intentionally misspelling her name in an attempt to divert suspicion from herself, especially since the man that was implicated was an ex-boyfriend that had helped the FBI complete their behavioral analysis of her. The FBI analyzed the letter and checked it for DNA and fingerprints, and while they did find DNA, it was not Michelle's or anyone's they were aware of. Despite law enforcement's strong suspicions of Michelle, with no physical evidence linking her to her son's murder, the case grew cold. Michelle moved on with her life and moved in with her brother in a nearby town. She flew pretty much under the radar. Until 2 years later, in 1994, when Michelle would end up in the news again, in the most unexpected way possible, Michelle had been kidnapped. For some time before she was kidnapped, Michelle had been telling friends and family that she was being stalked. Then one day, her brother found Michelle's car with its door open and engine still running, her glasses and purse still inside. Authorities searched her car, but didn't find anything worth noting with the exception of one item, the business card of an FBI agent with a note written on the back. "See you soon. It's not over." But this disappearance would not involve an extensive search. The following day, police received a call from Michelle herself. She said she'd been released by her kidnappers in Detroit, Michigan, over 600 miles, or almost 1,000 kilometers away. She claimed 2 FBI agents approached her at gunpoint, put a blanket over her head, then brought her to Detroit, where they released her. The FBI didn't believe her story for a second. The business card found in her car was a fake. There was no one by that name at the FBI. They'd later find that she had the cards printed herself. They had the call that she made to the police department traced. It was made from a payphone near a Greyhound bus station. Digging a little deeper, they found that Michelle had purchased a Greyhound bus ticket from Newark to Detroit. She was not kidnapped. She took the bus. Detectives didn't know what to make of this hoax, but it confirmed their suspicions about Michelle's level of integrity and willingness to lie. If she would stage a kidnapping for herself, what else would she do? Many of Michelle's family members were furious. The roller coaster ride she was taking everyone on was both selfish and suspicious. Michelle pleaded guilty to making false statements to the FBI and fraudulent use of a government seal. She was sentenced to 6 months of house arrest and 3 years of probation, and she would later spend a day in jail after stealing a laptop from her employer, then giving it to her then-boyfriend as a Christmas gift. She got busted when he had it serviced, which revealed that it was stolen. After that, Michelle decided it was time to start fresh. She moved to Minnesota, where her other brother lived. There she got married, had 2 sons, then within 3 years, divorced and relocated to Florida, moving in with her older sister. She kept photos of Timmy in the house to let her other sons know that they had a brother. All the while, the case of Timmy's murder remained cold. An occasional tip would come in that the county prosecutors would follow up on, but each lead led to a dead end. After one particular false lead in the early 2010s, an investigator felt it might be time again to review the investigation, looking at everything from a fresh perspective. They realized that the evidence found along with Timmy's remains had never been shown to people close to Michelle, particularly the blanket and the pillowcase. So they decided to focus on the blanket, since there was little chance the young boy would have been carrying a large blanket around a carnival on what was the hottest Memorial Day weekend on record at the time. So they surmised that the blanket was taken from Michelle's home and used to cover Timmy after his death. Detectives determined that if they could link the blanket to Michelle, it would be powerful evidence. They reviewed photos of the inside of Michelle's apartment prior to her son's disappearance, and while there were some blankets present, none matched the blanket found in the marsh. So over 20 years later, detectives began contacting anyone who may have had knowledge of the contents of Michelle's apartment at the time. Nearly everyone they contacted did not recognize the blanket as one that was in Michelle's home, with one exception. Michelle's niece, Jennifer Blair, now Jennifer Blair Dilcher. Upon Michelle's urging, Jennifer had moved to Florida to be near Michelle since Jennifer had been struggling with some substance abuse issues. Michelle helped Jennifer get into a detox facility and promised to watch Jennifer's children while she was getting cleaned up. However, once Michelle had Jennifer's kids, she decided that it was best for them to not be returned to Jennifer, determining her unfit. So while Jennifer was recovering in the facility, Michelle contacted Jennifer's in-laws and handed the children over to Jennifer's mother-in-law, who took the kids back to New Jersey. Jennifer considered it the ultimate betrayal, especially after all the years of support she had given Michelle. Now estranged from Michelle, detectives contacted Jennifer and asked her to try to rekindle her relationship with Michelle and solicit information about the murder. That approach didn't work, so next they asked her to come in to see if she recognized something. Jennifer arrived at the police station, not knowing what they wanted to show her. When she entered the room, there was a dirty, tattered blanket laying on the table. Immediately recognizing it as a blanket from Timmy's house where she babysat so many times when she was 13 or 14. She became emotional. Now that they had a witness placing the blanket at the home, on August 6, 2014, which would have been Timmy's 29th birthday, police arrested Michelle and charged her with the murder of her son. The criminal trial began on March 16, 2016, nearly 25 years after Timmy was murdered. With the blanket being the only evidence turning the case against Michelle into a viable one, and only the single witness tying the blanket to the house, the prosecution's connection was limited. But a few months before the trial, they caught a break. 2 other women who had babysat Timmy saw the photos of the blanket and stated that the blanket did indeed come from the home. One of those witnesses was 15 to 17 when she babysat Timmy a few times. The other was 14, again having babysat a few times 25 years prior. The prosecution contended that Timmy had become a burden to the young mother, struggling to provide care while maintaining a social life, bouncing from job to job, and unable to find a steady, satisfying relationship. They focused on the changes in Michelle's story, her unemotional behavior throughout the time her son was missing, and initially not acknowledging she worked near where her son was found. Among the witnesses they presented was the woman who said she spoke to Michelle at the carnival and never saw a child with her, nor did Michelle mention any child. They also called Michelle's ex-fiancé. He testified that he wasn't surprised when Timothy was attacked by the German Shepherd dog next door, knowing that Michelle would still leave Timothy outside alone with the dog, despite his warnings for her to not do so. The attack required 72 stitches to Timmy's face. He also testified that Michelle reminded him of an older sister watching her little brother, bothered by the responsibility and feeling like she was being pressured into having to watch him. He canceled the engagement after he considered whether Michelle would be a good wife, mother, and partner in life, and his answer was no to all three. He became engaged to someone else about 1 month before Timmy disappeared. The prosecution also called Michelle's brother's girlfriend at the time, who testified that on one occasion when she was watching Timmy, Michelle had to work late and instructed her to send Timmy home with a man the girlfriend did not know. But Timmy didn't want to go with him, which made Michelle angry, so when Michelle arrived to pick Timmy up, she pulled him down the stairs and pushed him into the car. She also testified that Michelle once commented that she was a weekend mother and not made for this shit, and that although Michelle was supposed to pick her infant daughter up to go to the fair that fateful day, she never showed up or even called. Michelle's defense attorney argued that Michelle loved Timmy more than life itself, and that the case was wholly a character assassination. They argued that all the evidence was circumstantial, without a single confession, no DNA, no fibers, no murder weapon, no physical evidence whatsoever linking his client to the case. He outlined how deeply Michelle cared for her son, and how her activities just prior to Timmy's disappearance were hardly indicative of someone who would have killed him, including clothes shopping, and even buying his graduation gown. They argued that the witnesses to the blanket, the sole piece of evidence that brought Michelle to trial, were either testifying out of spite for Michelle, or biased by the extreme media exposure the case was getting. And the defense had one final ace they felt raised out about Michelle's guilt. Michelle's defense had received a call from an ex-convict named Damien Dowdle. He reported that a cellmate of his, Bernard Joseph McCain, had confessed to abducting a child from a park, then strangling him when the child began to scream. He told me that while he was out, he was at a park with a big event going nearby, and while he was at that park, a boy had gone into the woods, and there was some sort of an argument, and the boy went into the woods. The kid began screaming and crying, and he got concerned that people were nearby, and there was a search going on under for this kid, so he wanted to shut the kid up, and he strangled him. Dowdle said he had been reading about Timothy's case, and found it eerily similar to what McCain had told him. Dowdle's claim was backed by the fact that he had reported the admission to police back in 1991, when McCain first told him about it. The prosecution called McCain himself to the stand. McCain, not surprisingly, denied Dowdle's claim, and the prosecution didn't offer any evidence that McCain was even in New Jersey at the time of the crime. Did you tell him that you hit and strangled the little boy? No. And that you killed him? No. The case rested, and the jury deliberated. They found Michelle Lodzinski guilty of first-degree murder. The sentencing guidelines for her crime call for between 30 years in prison to life. Her attorney fought for the least amount of time, arguing, "I'm sure Timmy would not want to impose a life sentence on his mother." On January 5, 2017, 49-year-old Michelle Lodzinski was sentenced to the minimum 30 years in prison. The judge remarked that she will be old and gray by the time she is released. After Michelle's conviction, an additional attorney joined her defense team, appalled that the case was even brought to trial with what he considered zero evidence. They appealed the conviction. Their appeals were denied until the case was finally set to be heard by the New Jersey Supreme Court. Of the 7 Supreme Court justices, one recused himself, having worked in the office of the New Jersey U.S. Attorney at the time Timmy disappeared. With the 6 remaining judges, the appeal decision was split 3-3. Normally, when there is such a split in New Jersey courts, the conviction verdict would stand. But Michelle's attorneys argued that that split violated her right to due process and requested that the Supreme Court reconsider the case. It responded by borrowing a judge from the lower court to serve as a tiebreaker. In that unprecedented move, a tiebreaker judge ruled Michelle's favor with the final ruling stating that no murder conviction has ever been upheld on such a dearth of evidence. 2 key factors in the majority decision were first that they had serious doubts about the blanket testimony and its witnesses. And second, in order to convict on a murder charge, it has to be proven that the person knowingly and purposely committed the murder, an impossibility since the cause of death remained unknown. They additionally noted that the prosecution's arguments surrounding the struggles of a single mother were not only not credible, but a gender stereotype about single working mothers. Noting that it is not uncommon for a 23-year-old single mother raising a child on her own to have financial and social challenges. That singularly unremarkable scenario hardly indicates a motive to murder one's child. So, on December 28, 2021, the same evening the verdict was handed down, Michelle Ladzinski's conviction was thrown out, and she was released from prison having served 5 years since she was sentenced. I'm grateful for all the people that helped me and stood by my side to get me home to my family and friends. I want to go home and just see my kids. Given double jeopardy, which prohibits someone from being tried for the same matter twice, Michelle can never be tried again for Timmy's murder, even if new evidence surfaces. Reactions from those around Michelle were mixed. Her attorney stated, "This was a great day for the rule of law and the principles that matter to us, that convictions have to be based on evidence and not based on speculation or emotion." Michelle's younger brother Michael, who had come to believe in Michelle's guilt, stated, "Justice Albin and his group believe they have righted some great wrong today, but all they did was rob justice from a little boy. Shame on them." The 3 judges who unsuccessfully dissented lamented that an unsatisfied defendant could be granted a new hearing, despite her rights having been fully protected during both her trial and appeal. They considered the decision a disservice to our jury system and grave injustice to the victim, 5-year-old Timothy Wiltsey. Jurors from the previous trial were furious, with a group of them stating, "How dare they set aside our verdict? These judges have failed in their duty to uphold the law and achieve justice for little Timmy Wiltsey." Michelle has remained private since her release, and multiple reports assume she has returned to her family, including her 2 sons in Florida, resuming her life there. We look forward to hearing what you think about this case. Its lack of forensic evidence of nearly any kind certainly makes you wonder. Given that police collected hair, DNA, carpet fibers, thoroughly searched Michelle's home, car, everything. But the massive amount of circumstantial evidence is impossible to ignore as well. Outside of some of Michelle's family, we scarcely came across reports of anyone who didn't feel that she at least knew what happened if not committed the murder herself. Only a very small number of people likely know for sure. Case 5. Jerry Michael Williams, who went by Michael or Mike, was born in Bradfordville, Florida, to parents Jerry and Cheryl Williams. The couple also had another son, Mike's older brother, Nick, with Jerry working as a Greyhound bus driver and Cheryl running a home daycare, so that she could be at home with her children. The family was comfortable but frugal. They opted to live in a trailer instead of buying a traditional home, preferring to save them money so they could later spend it on their children's education. And that they did. They saved up and sent the boys to a private high school. By everyone's account, Mike was as kind of a person as they come, always stepping in to offer help, always responsible, always there whenever you need him. His mother noted how he never walked anywhere, he always ran. He was always eager to get things done and to help people. And so, it was no surprise that Mike was a stellar student, excelling academically and athletically. He was the captain of the football team, as well as class president. It was during high school that he met fellow student Denise Merrill. Denise was a cheerleader and also worked with Mike on student council. The two quickly fell for each other and began dating. The couple would become very close with another couple, Mike's best friend since 9th grade, Brian Winchester, and his girlfriend, Kathy. They would double date regularly and were generally inseparable. Having hunted with his dad since he was 6 years old, Mike took up duck hunting during his high school years, a passion both he and Brian shared. It became Mike's favorite hobby. In 1988, Mike, Denise, Brian, and Kathy all graduated high school. The couples remained close after graduating, and in 1994, both couples got married. Mike had begun working in the real estate industry, and Brian as an agent selling insurance. Mike's work ethic and kind and humble character continued on during his employment. The owner of the company where he worked remarked at how he was the hardest working man he'd ever known, how he never took days off, and would work such long hours that he'd have to take the building keys away from him to prevent him from coming to work over the weekend. After 5 years of marriage, Mike and Denise welcomed a daughter in 1999, who they named Ansley. We're just totally overwhelmed. She was due Tuesday, and she would have made me wait a whole other year for Mother's Day. So she came yesterday, so I could enjoy this day-to-day with her. It was unbelievable. I have a whole new respect for my wife and women in general, and what they go through to bring a new child, new life into the world. And just prior to Ansley being born, Brian and Kathy also welcomed a child, a son. Around the time of Ansley's birth, Mike's dad passed away. It was hard on Mike, but it made him cherish his family that much more. As a result, Mike began having conversations with his insurance agent slash best friend, Brian, about making sure his family was taken care of should anything happen to him. So Brian wrote up a $1 million life insurance policy on Mike to go along with two other policies he'd arranged for him in the past. One for $500,000 and one for $250,000, bringing his total coverage to $1.75 million. The Williams family seemed happy and content with a nice home and a loving family. It was midwinter 2000, and Mike decided to unwind from the week's work by going duck hunting. He left before the sun rose and set out for Lake Seminole, one of his favorite duck hunting destinations. The lake was about an hour away, so when Mike had not returned by noon, Denise called her father. She told him that Mike had not come home yet, and that she was worried because he knew they were supposed to celebrate their 6th wedding anniversary that day. She also notified their best friend Brian and her father drove out to the lake to find Mike. They were joined by Florida Fish and Wildlife to search for the missing hunter. After hours of searching, they finally found Mike's Ford Bronco near an isolated boat dock. A helicopter was called in to help with the search, particularly given that Lake Seminole covered 30,000 acres. Then, finally, after 9 hours of searching, Mike's boat was located. Inside, authorities found a shotgun still in its case, decoys, life jackets, and more. This indicated that Mike was not actively involved in hunting when he disappeared, since his shotgun was still in its case. Also, the inside of the boat was relatively clean. It didn't contain any of the mud, water, or other mess typically found during the process of hunting. Authorities were baffled. The cove where Mike's boat was found is believed to have been an orchard at one point back, before the adjacent rivers were dammed to create the lake. They actually called the cove Stump Field due to the many remaining stumps that peaked above and below the water level, which forced any power boats in the area to exercise extreme caution. So it seemed reasonable to investigators to theorize that Mike had hit a stump with his boat, fallen out, sunk into the 8 to 12-foot water, and then drowned, unable to save himself once his waders filled with water and pulled him down. Once daylight arrived, the puzzled investigators began taking a closer look at Mike's boat. They quickly determined that his gas tank was almost completely full, indicating that the engine had hardly run at all. They also inspected the boat's propeller. If the boat had hit a stump, there should be residue on the propeller blades, but there was not any residue. Given those findings, they determined that Mike must certainly be nearby. So they deploy 15 boats along with a helicopter, but they still don't find any trace of Mike. Then, on the 10th day, in an area they'd searched numerous times, searchers found a camouflage pattern hat which Brian confirms belonged to Mike. Authorities continue searching for days, then weeks, then months, but with little optimism of finding Mike alive. By February of 2001, the search is called off. A private search team that was helping officials with the search theorized that Mike was likely eaten by the alligators that infested those waters. But that theory didn't ring true to many people, including Mike's mother, Cheryl Williams, who used to worry about the alligators whenever her son went hunting. She would later recall, "I was always afraid that an alligator would get him. And he would tell me, alligators sleep when the water's cold, and we only hunt ducks when the weather is cold." Wildlife authorities and experts also did not agree with the alligator theory, knowing that alligators don't feed during the cold temperatures. They stated, all they are doing is maintaining their body temperature, and that it was too cold for an alligator to be interested in food at all. They noted that even if an alligator had defied all known gator behavior and eaten Mike, they would have most certainly left something behind. They called the theory a stretch, noting that of the 80 known deaths on the lake by that time, every single one had been found. They said it would be very, very unusual to have the complete disappearance of a full-grown man. Almost 6 months after Mike went missing, a pair of waders were found floating in Lake Seminole. Then 2 days later, a jacket was found. Inside its pocket was Mike's hunting license. Despite the new findings not even remotely proving Mike's fate, Denise petitions a judge to declare Mike legally dead. Based on the new discoveries, a judge agrees and grants Denise a death certificate. That decision allowed Denise to immediately file claims against her husband's life insurance policies, which she promptly did. Mike's death was officially ruled as accidental drowning, and the Florida Department of Law Enforcement, or FDLE, closed the case. A short while after that, Mike's mother, Cheryl Williams, encountered Brian, who shared the news about the death certificate with her. She recalled their conversation, stating, "I learned about the death certificate from Brian Winchester. Brian stopped me in his truck, and he said, 'Well, I guess you're surprised that they declared Michael dead so quickly.' And I looked at him, and I said, 'Well, no, Brian. Not the way that evidence just popped up out of the clear blue. And he said, "What do you mean, Ms. Williams? That was a gift from God." I said, "Brian, I've had gifts from God." That was not. Those waiters were planted, and many others agreed. Fish and wildlife, who had instantly rejected the alligator theory, were highly skeptical about this mysteriously appearing evidence. But tasked with analyzing the clothing, they scrutinized the suspicious waiters, looking for any signs of deteriorated human remains, trauma, or alligator teeth marks. They didn't find any. Additionally, any waders that would have been in the water for 6 months would have accumulated a thick layer of slime, making them nearly impossible to pick up. But those waders looked practically new and didn't have any slime on them. Likewise, Mike's hunting license, also supposedly in the water for nearly 6 months, was nearly pristine. A license in the water for that long should have deteriorated and been completely illegible. Authorities felt this newly found evidence that had somehow been overlooked during the exhaustive months-long searches had been staged. But without any direct evidence of foul play, the case went cold. But not for Cheryl Williams. She did not buy the flawed theories. She knew her son did not drown in the lake, and he was not eaten by alligators, and she would not rest until she brought her son home. She had friends make cards to hand out with his picture on it. She bought billboards, tacked posters anywhere she could, and she marched. She took her homemade picket sign to churches, to the police, and took whoever she thought could help her, trying desperately to get authorities to reopen her son's case. Police told her that her son was eaten by alligators, and that was not criminal. But still, she marched, in her one-woman picket line, fighting for her son. Until February 2004. Police finally conceded to the persistent mother and reopened the case. Since the case had been cold for several years, investigators were essentially looking for anything they'd missed previously. And the fresh insight paid off. They started noticing one name that continued to surface that didn't stand out to them at the time. Brian Winchester. He was the one who found Mike's boat in the dark, in the middle of the night, when the multitude of other searchers could not. He was the one who identified the hat found on the lake as Mike's. And to their surprise, he was the one who wrote up the most recent $1 million life insurance policy on Mike. Brian and his wife Kathy had since separated in 2001 and divorced in 2003. Investigators began repiecing together what they had. While a lot of evidence was either lost or not captured due to the initial assumption that there was no foul play, they still had some clues. Including, when the boat was found, its engine was off, and it had a full tank of gas. If Mike had fallen off of the boat, it would have been because he hit a stump while the engine was running. And if that were the case, the engine would have stayed on, and the boat would have run in circles until it ran out of fuel. There was a storm that should have carried the boat in the opposite direction from where it was found. And Mike didn't usually hunt alone. So by this point, all the investigators involved were confident that this was a suspicious missing person case. And given Brian's connection at every point, they were beginning to be convinced of his involvement in Mike's disappearance. Then in 2005, just as the investigation was heating up, Brian and Denise got married. While some were shocked, many others were keenly aware that the parent had been having an affair for years, even before Mike's disappearance. With suspicions having arisen about Brian, and with him suddenly married to the beneficiary of the life insurance policy that helped draw suspicion to him in the first place, police had their eye on the couple. But without any forensic evidence from the scene near the time of the disappearance, or Mike's body, or enough evidence for a search warrant or arrest, it was impossible for police to make a case. So even though they felt strongly that the newly married Winchesters were involved, the FVLE closed its case in 2006 and stopped returning Sheriff Williams' phone calls. But investigators never lost sight of the case. They were patient. They knew that someday something would happen. Someone would crack and reveal the truth. And they were right. By 2011, with the case still cold, Cheryl Williams had not given up. Starting New Year's Day 2012, she began writing one letter each day to Governor Rick Scott, requesting either a special prosecutor or someone other than the FVLE investigate her son's death. After not receiving so much as a simple acknowledgement that her letters were even being received, she dug deep to find out why. She found that the governor's office had forwarded each and every one of her letters, unopened, to the FVLE, where they were being placed in a case file. Cheryl was livid, but she would not have to fight too much longer. At the end of 2012, Denise and Brian Winchester became separated. Then, a few years later in 2015, Denise filed for divorce. Brian fought the divorce as long as he could, but ultimately had to concede. And as they were in the final stretch of the divorce, on the evening of August 5th, 2016, Denise was in her car talking with her sister, when she noticed someone emerge from the back seat. It was Brian. He was distraught over the divorce, and because she had not returned his calls or texts. His mother had also just been diagnosed with terminal cancer, and his teenage son, he had with Kathy, decided to move in with her instead of him. He held Denise at gunpoint and ordered her to drive. Instead of going where he told her to go, she pulled into a CVS parking lot. She was able to talk to him and calm him down. She then drove him back to his truck. When he got out of the car, he grabbed several things from her back seat that he brought with him, including a couple of sheets, bleach, and tools. He clearly had plans. He apologized to her and made her promise not to report their little encounter to the police, which she promptly did the moment he left. At the Leon County Sheriff's Office, Denise reports that her estranged husband kidnapped her at gunpoint, and he put it right here in my ribs. He put it right here, and he goes with this, and he pressed it in there. And so I just kept saying, you've got to stop living that way. You've got, you could get us all back if you'll just turn your life around, because he was a Christian at one point. And I was like, if you'll just turn back to the Lord, it's the whole time I'm turning this way, I'm buckled in, but he's calm, he's calming down. And so the gun's still right there, and I'm just like, what are you doing? Why are you doing this? And he's like, what am I doing? I could tell he was, and I was like, I don't know. I know you want to talk to me, and this is not the way to do it. I know. What have I done? It's like he kind of woke up. Like, what have I done? What have I done? It's the break they've been waiting years for. The FDLE are immediately called in, and everyone involved is fully aware of the background, the scenario, and the stakes. During her 3-hour talk with police, they go for information about Mike's disappearance. Where do you think Mike's buried at? Oh, I have no idea. Any speculation on that? On where he's buried? Buried. I believe. You don't really believe he died on the lake. I do. Why? I just always have. That's what I believe. And I have, from when he was saying roundabout, I don't know. I talked with the last 2 people, and I can't remember if he wanted me to turn left or right. No. That's not what I'm talking about. Why do you think Mike perished in the lake? Because he didn't. He didn't die in Lake Seminole. Okay. I don't. That's what I've always believed. That's what I believe. And why? I've never been proven anything different. I don't. Well, is there any proof if he would have perished in that lake, he would have been found? Okay. There's never been a person that has fallen over, or whatever, that they've never found except for Mike. That's literally, it's a possibility that he died at that lake. I guess that's just what I believe. Really? Yeah. Well, you knew all the information about, what was recovered out there and all that, right? My dad would keep me updated, and then investigators start revealing information that they had been keeping under wraps. Information that exposed far more of a relationship than any of the suspects had divulged. I guess you, Mike, Kathy, and Brian, y'all were pretty close before Mike disappeared, right? Yeah. How close were y'all? I would say we talked pretty much every day. We were very close. Yeah. I'm still very close with Kathy. Yeah, I know that. Again, we researched, trips y'all used to make to Orlando and some other stuff. Apparently you were really close. Okay. Do you know what I'm talking about? I don't. Me and Kathy still. She's texting me right now. So we're still very close. Okay. If I say we're totally aware of all the videos, you probably know what I'm talking about. If you say what? The videos. I would have to see them. Well, then that's not going to happen. But you're clueless when I say videos. I don't, yeah. You, Kathy, and Brian? I would have to see them. Yeah. You're not going to talk. You don't say you're going to see them? No, I'm just starting to feel very uncomfortable. Okay. I've been uncomfortable for a long time, because we needed some things on this case. More about the relationship he was referring to in a moment. The interview continues, and Denise deflects their attempts to get information about Mike's disappearance at every turn. They inform her that they will be arresting Brian, and that he may be more willing to talk about the disappearance. She doesn't waver, but they are not worried because with the kidnapping claim, they can now arrest Brian. And that will turn out to be the real break they need in the case. Brian is arrested and charged with kidnapping, domestic assault, and armed burglary, 2 of which are felonies. Investigators accurately share with Brian that he's facing up to 30 years in prison for the kidnapping, and they offer him a plea deal. Share what he knows about Mike Williams' disappearance, and they won't pursue any charges against him for that case. He takes them up on their offer. He shares everything he knows, and it's a lot. He starts with the fact that he and Denise had been having an affair long before Mike's disappearance. So I've known Denise my whole life, basically since preschool. We started having an affair October 13th, 1997. Basically, Denise made it clear she would never get divorced, primarily because of appearances. She is ultra concerned about the way that she appears to the world. Mike knew something was up, but he didn't know what was up. I know Denise told me that he went to Denise's mom, Johnny Merrill, and was asking her or concerned about money cash that was disappearing from their accounts. And he didn't know if she was having an affair. So Denise was getting worried that things were going to blow up. And she was concerned about not getting divorced because of the appearances of it, but also because she was scared to lose her daughter. She didn't want to lose any time with her daughter. There was also that $500,000 policy. I believe it was paid semi-annually or quarterly. Denise paid the bills. The plan with Mike, when I sold him the $1 million policy, was that he was going to drop the $500,000. He wasn't going to keep that. Denise knew the timing on the $500,000 policy, and when it was supposed to be lapsing. And I can't tell you what that date was, but it was going to be soon after December of 2000. Their anniversary was also coming up. I think there was pressure from Mike on her. They needed to have another baby, or something like that. There was just a lot of pressure. So sometime in 2000, the subject of Mike or Kathy's death started coming up in conversations. There was no point in talking about anything happening with Kathy. That was not going to happen. I was not going to do anything like that to my son. Brian then outlined several scenarios that he and Denise considered to murder Mike. They settled on a date, changed the date, and when the final date arrived, Brian met Mike under the guise of duck hunting and proceeded as planned. We went to the landing where his truck was found. We launched the boat. It was just like a hunting trip was supposed to be. The plan that was discussed and come up with was that he was going to be wearing waders. The belief was if somebody falls in the water with waders, you're going down. We went out like we were going hunting. We got to the area where his waders and jacket were found. I got him to stand up, and I pushed him into the water. He got his jacket off and his waders off. I was driving the boat. I didn't know what to do, and I ended up shooting him. Brian then got Mike's body into his car, pushed the boat back out, then went to rendezvous with his father-in-law, who he had also planned to go hunting with that morning to establish his alibi. But realizing he wouldn't make it to meet his father-in-law on time, he went home where Kathy was still sleeping and got into bed with her, establishing his new alibi. Then he pretended to just wake up, called his father-in-law to say he'd overslept and wouldn't make it, then went off to bury Mike's body in a remote location. He tells police where they can find the body, which turns out to be just 5 miles from his mother's home. They retrieve Mike's body wrapped in a tarp and still wearing his wedding band. In December of 2017, Brian is tried and convicted of the charge. At his sentencing hearing, Denise reads a statement with her recommendation for his sentence. Jumping up while I was driving, shoved a gun in my ribs and kidnapped me. I have relived it every single day, and it is always with me. He made the choice to plan and act out the crimes of August the 5th. He is the reason he has been sitting in jail the past 16 months. He's the reason that he lost me and his children. Since August the 5th, 2016, I have been diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder and with extreme anxiety. I start each day with the memory of him jumping out of the back, and I end each day feeling the gun shoved in my ribs with a turn on my right side trying to sleep. Each day when I get in my car to go to work, I look back, check the back seats. This is my life now. We all have the right to feel secure and safe, and he took my sense of security and safety from me. He stole it from me, and I will never be the same. What? He stole it from me, and I will never be the same. I live each day with the fear of his retaliation for my decision to tell. He will finish what he has started no matter what age he is when he's released. For all of these reasons, I'm asking you to sentence him to life in prison for the crimes he has committed. It comes down to my life or his, and I'm asking you please choose mine. Thank you. Brian is sentenced to 20 years in prison, and as agreed upon, he will not face trial for Mike's murder. Based on the information Brian has shared and from the investigation, Denise is arrested in May of 2018. She is charged with first-degree murder, conspiracy to commit murder, and accessory after the fact. Her trial begins later that year in December 2018. The prosecution outlines how Denise allegedly began conspiring with Brian to murder Mike in March of 2009, months before his disappearance. Brian Winchester is the prosecution's star witness. Another scenario that we came up with was Mike and I going on a hunting trip together, and there being an accident where both he and I ended up in the water, and he drowned, and I did not. Denise liked this idea because I don't know how to word it exactly, but she felt better, I guess, about herself, or we could feel better about ourselves if there was a chance that he could make it out of it, you know. I mean, I think there was even talk about, well, it'll be up to God what happens and not us. It won't be a murder. It'll be, an accident. Would it be fair to say that having the intention of being a widow was far better in her mind than being a divorcee? Yes, sir. Better to be a rich widow than a poor divorcee, and her biggest concern with the divorce was she didn't want to share custody of Ansley with Mike. She was not going to have Ansley going back and forth to 2 different houses. All of our conversations and planning, and everything I would say is very mutual. I'm not going to sit here and say that Denise planned everything and, I was just a dumb guy who went along with what she wanted to do. I mean, I instigated a lot of it. I helped come up with ideas. I planned a lot of things, but overall it was very mutual. I mean, we wanted to be together, and we weren't going to let anything stop that. He also shares in the presence of jurors the events he previously outlined for investigators regarding Mike's disappearance, including his and Denise's involvement. He explains how he went out on the boat with his best friend, convinced him to put his waders on, pushed him over, and expected him to sink and drown. But it didn't go as planned. So he was in the water, and he was like struggling, and the motor of the boat was still running, and I pulled off just a little bit to get kind of away from him, so that he couldn't reach back into the boat, and I didn't know it at the time. I didn't know if he was trying to swim, or I didn't know what was going on, but what I came to find out, or eventually realized, was he was taking the waders and the jacket off, and he got those off, and I think I forgot to tell you about this part before, but I remember now that that area of the lake had a lot of snags, a lot of dead trees that come up out of the water, and there's a lot of stumps that come up out of the water, and he swam over one of those stumps and held on to it, and I didn't know what to do, but he started to yell. I had my gun in the boat, and so I loaded my gun, and he was in the water, and as I passed by I shot him. And for good measure the prosecution also drops a bombshell. They show Brian some photos. Do you recognize those photographs? Yes, sir. What are those photographs of? They're photographs of Denise with my first wife, Kathy, of a sexual nature. And where were those photographs taken? Panama City. And when was that? I believe this was after Mike's death occurred. He also explained that the attempted kidnapping of Denise occurred because he was afraid that with the pending divorce, Denise might decide to divulge the truth about Mike's disappearance and turn him in. So in the car he made her swear to never tell anyone, and to take their secret to the grave. She promised that she would never tell. The prosecution lineup also included Cheryl Williams. When the article came out in the newspaper, Denise called me on the phone. She was livid. She said, "You and Nick need to come over here right now." We went to her house in the front yard. We weren't even invited inside. She was screaming at me. She was mad about the article, and she said, screaming at me, "I don't ever want to hear Mike's name again. I don't ever want to see Mike's picture in the paper again. I don't ever want to know anything you're doing about Mike again. I have to get on with my life." The jury deliberated for 8 hours. They found Denise Williams Winchester guilty on all charges. Before her sentencing, there was one woman who had worked tirelessly for 17 years and had something to say. Judge Hankinson, for the next 17 years I made telephone calls, put up missing person signs, compiled my notes into a book, and had people post on social media for me. With the help of friends, we raised money and put up billboards. I bought ads in the Tallahassee Democrat and worked with Twin City News asking everyone to help me find Mike. I stood on street corners waving my picket signs with pictures of Mike on them. I was cussed out by ministers for being too close to their church. I wrote 2,600 letters to the governor of Florida asking for help in finding my son. They told me Mike drowned and got eaten by alligators, and there was no need for an investigation. They laughed at me and called me crazy. 9 months after Mike disappeared, his wife Denise told me if I continued to seek a criminal investigation, I would lose Ansley, my granddaughter, Mike's only child. Judge Hankinson, I am a fighter, not a victim. I love Ansley, but Mike was my son. Instead of investigating, they chose to ridicule and call me crazy and tell me that I didn't do things the right way. There is no manual to tell a mother what to do when her child goes missing. I just did what God put on my heart to do. Judge Hankinson, not only did Denise kill my son, she stole my granddaughter Ansley, Mike's only child. For her entire life, Ansley was raised in a house with the murderers of her father, while being denied the love of her father's family. I am asking you to lock Denise Merrill Williams Winchester up for the rest of her life with no chance of parole. She has already lived 18 years longer than my son. She got to watch Mike's daughter grow up. Nick, Mike, and I didn't. Judge Hankinson, for the rest of my life, when I try to sleep at night, I will see my son clinging to a tree stump and legs in the door, knowing that his best friend is trying to kill him. I hear his voice screaming for help. I wasn't there to help him. It will haunt me forever. We are in this courtroom today because of God, not Cheryl Williams. I am Mike's mother, and I did what God told me to do. My son's horrific death demands justice. With today's sentencing of Denise Merrill Williams Winchester, I believe justice will have been served. Thank you. Thank you, ma'am. Denise Williams Winchester was sentenced to life in prison for the first-degree murder charge and 30 years for conspiracy to commit murder. Denise Winchester appealed her conviction and sentence, and in November of 2020, her first-degree murder conviction was overturned. The court ruled that the state failed to prove that she helped Brian Winchester commit the crime. Her conviction on conspiracy to commit murder was upheld. Denise is currently serving out her 30-year sentence for that crime at the Florida Women's Reception Center in Ocala, Florida. The state of Florida is appealing the overturned first-degree murder conviction in an attempt to have it reinstated. Brian Winchester is serving his sentence at Wacola Correctional Institution near Tallahassee, Florida. He will be eligible for parole in 2034, at which time he will be 63 years old. As far as we have learned, Cheryl has still not seen her granddaughter. She said to take out an ad each year on Ansley's birthday in hopes that she'll see it and contact her. Until then, it has been reported that Ansley doesn't believe that her mother was involved in her father's murder. And now this woman, we watched you, and we cried for you. You have our most sincere condolences and our utmost admiration. Case 6. James Oliver Huberty was born in Canton, Ohio, on October 1, 1942. In the early 1950s, Huberty's father purchased a farm in the Pennsylvania Amish country. But Huberty's mother refused to live in the Amish country and left the family to become a religious missionary. From then on, Huberty became a loner with an explosive personality. After Huberty's parents split, his father remarried a young schoolteacher. But they didn't get along. When Huberty's father, who was explosive himself, would arrive home each day, he'd fire off 10 to 12 shots to warn the family that he was almost home. In 1962, Huberty enrolled at a community college, earning a degree in sociology. He later attended the Pittsburgh Institute of Mortuary Science, where he received a license in embalming. It was there that he met Etna Markland. The two married in 1965 and had 2 daughters. The family of 4 would soon move from Canton to Massillon, Ohio, where Huberty found work as a welder. There, the couple would establish their reputation for violent behavior, with James Huberty once shooting his German Shepherd in the head when a neighbor complained about it damaging his car. And another neighbor noted how he'd noticed Huberty's front door ajar, with Huberty sitting just inside it, holding a shotgun. Threats and altercations toward neighbors were frequent. And Etna was volatile as well, once threatening another mom with a 9mm handgun after an altercation which Etna herself aggressively initiated. Domestic violence was also a regular occurrence in the household, as were complaints from neighbors about the Hubertys and from the Hubertys about neighbors. When calls would come to the local police station about minor incidents, officers would joke that it was the Hubertys again. Then, in 1982, after 10 years of working as a welder in Massillon, Huberty was laid off. As a result, he became concerned about making his house payments. He worried constantly, and he blamed the country, the government, and Ronald Reagan for his misfortune. He was so disenchanted with his country that he applied for residency in Mexico, an odd fact since he was known to harbor extreme hatred toward immigrants, especially Mexican immigrants. He also stockpiled food and weapons, a lot of them, including an Israeli-made, military-style Uzi machine gun. The following year, 1983, the family moved briefly to Tijuana, Mexico, then finally to San Isidro in January of 1984. There, Huberty landed a job as a security guard, but he was fired on July 10th, 8 days before the shooting, due to poor work performance and general physical instability. On the day before the shooting, 41-year-old James Huberty called the San Diego Mental Health Clinic, requesting an appointment. He had shared with Etna a couple days prior to that he felt like he was having a mental health problem. The clinic receptionist told Huberty that someone would call him back within hours. According to Etna, Huberty sat quietly by the phone waiting for the return call for several hours. At the clinic, since Huberty's polite demeanor didn't convey any urgency, and since he'd never been hospitalized for any mental health issues in the past, she lobbed the call as non-crisis, which slated it to be handled within 48 hours. After waiting, Huberty left for a while, returned, had dinner with his family, and appeared normal. The next morning, Huberty attended a minor traffic court hearing, then took his family to lunch at a nearby McDonald's, different from the one of the incident, and then to visit the San Diego Zoo. While strolling the zoo, he told Etna that his life is effectively over and that society had their chance, referring to the clinic's failure to return his call the previous day. The family returned home after the zoo. It was right after that, at around 3:45 p.m., that Huberty walked into their bedroom where Etna was relaxing and kissed her goodbye, something he'd normally not do. She asked him where he was going, and he calmly replied that he was going hunting for humans. Etna would later state that she didn't take him seriously, as he'd made similarly bizarre statements throughout their marriage. The couple's 12-year-old daughter, Zelia, who noticed that her father was strapped with all his weaponry as he was leaving, assumed he was going out to target practice at a rural location, like he often did to alleviate anger. But he was not. James Huberty got into his black Mercury Marquis and drove. He first drove toward a Big Bear supermarket, then toward a U.S. post office, before finally entering the parking lot of the McDonald's at approximately 3:56 p.m., just a short block from his Averill Road apartment. He was carrying a Browning 9mm semi-automatic pistol, modified to make it automatic, a 12-gauge pump-action shotgun, and a 9mm Uzi semi-automatic rifle, the weapon he would primarily use during the massacre. He also had a box and a cloth bag filled with hundreds of rounds of ammunition for each weapon. 45 customers were inside the restaurant. Sadly, mass shootings in the U.S. are all too commonplace today, but in 1984, they were an almost non-existent occurrence. So as the massacre began to unfold, the understandably unassuming victims in the restaurant thought the whole thing was a joke, and they, along with law enforcement, were placed in unfamiliar territory without effective strategies for survival or for stopping the massacre. Huberty entered the restaurant and armed with the Uzi. He first aimed it at 16-year-old John Arnold. Huberty pulled the trigger, but nothing happened. As he checked to see what was wrong with his gun, 22-year-old Neva Kane, the restaurant's manager who had just returned from her honeymoon, began walking toward John, who was already walking away, figuring the whole thing was a distasteful joke. By then, Huberty had corrected the problem with his gun, fired a test shot into the ceiling, then aimed the weapon at Neva, shooting her in the head. She would die minutes later. He then immediately shot Arnold, wounding him in the chest and arm, just before shouting, "Everybody on the ground." Then he called everyone in the primarily Latino-populated restaurant dirty swine and Vietnam ****, before stating that he had killed thousands in Vietnam, and that he intended to kill 1,000 more, even though he had never served in the military nor killed anyone. Hearing Huberty's ranting and seeing the two people shot, 25-year-old customer Victor Rivera tried to persuade Huberty to not shoot anyone else. Huberty responded by shooting Victor 14 times, shouting at him to shut up the entire time. Customers and employees scrambled to hide behind booths, tables, and counters. Next, he shot 11-year-old Aurora Pina, wounding her in the leg. She was being shielded by her incredibly brave 18-year-old pregnant aunt, Jackie Rees, whom Huberty shot with his Uzi 48 times, sadly rendering her poor body in a condition that would later prevent her family from laying her to rest in the lovely pink dress they got for her, because there wasn't enough of her intact. Jackie's 8-month-old baby, Carlos Rees, who had just been baptized 1 month prior to that, sat up and began crying. Huberty shouted at the baby, then shot him in the back, killing him. Then, Huberty shot and killed 62-year-old Lawrence V. Louise, a truck driver who was retiring that day after 40 years of driving. His family panicked when they saw his truck in the parking lot on television. They learned of his death hours later. Huberty then proceeded to a family crouched near the play area of the restaurant, where a couple was shielding their son and his friend underneath the tables with their bodies. The mother, Letha Reagan Herrera, had barricaded her son, Mateo, under one booth, while her husband, Ronald Herrera, guarded his son's friend, Keith Thomas, under another. Ronald instructed Keith not to move, and when Huberty approached them, he shot Ronald 6 times in the stomach, chest, arm, hip, shoulder, and head. Ronald miraculously survived. Keith was also shot in the arm, wrist, and left elbow, but he was blocked from most of the bullets by Ronald. Keith also survived, and would later recall how Ronald saved his life, and how he couldn't feel any pain from the bullets. Ronald's caring and loving wife, Letha, and his artistic, musical son, Mateo, were both killed, having been shot numerous times in the head. Near the Herreras, 3 women were also hiding beneath a booth. 24-year-old Guadalupe Del Rio was wedged against a wall shielded by her friends, 25-year-old Gloria Ramirez and 31-year-old Aristelci Vilas Vargas. Guadalupe was shot several times, but not seriously wounded. Gloria, miraculously, was not hit, and Aristelci, tragically, received a single shot to the back of her head. She died the next day. She would be the only person fatally wounded who lived long enough to reach a hospital. Huberty next killed 45-year-old banker Hugo Velasquez Vasquez, shooting him once in the chest, killing him. The first call to police to report the shooting was made at 4 p.m. The call notified police that a child had been shot and taken to the U.S. Post Office on San Isidro Boulevard. The dispatcher mistakenly sent responding officers to the wrong McDonald's 2 miles or 3 kilometers from the San Isidro location, costing several precious minutes of the area not being locked down, during which time several other victims, unaware of what was happening inside, approached the restaurant. Starting with Lydia Flores. At just after 4 p.m., Lydia drove into the parking lot and headed to the drive-through window. She noticed shattered glass and heard gunshots. She immediately looked up and saw Huberty through the window shooting. She reversed her car and crashed into a fence. She then hid in bushes with her 2-year-old daughter until the shooting ended. Then, at approximately 4:05 p.m., married couple Astolfo and Maricela Felix drove into the parking lot and immediately noticed the shattered glass. Astolfo assumed that the restaurant was being renovated or repaired and that Huberty, who was making his way toward their car, was one of the construction crew. Huberty fired both his shotgun and his Uzi. The couple and their 4-month-old baby, Carla, called Carlita. He shot Maricela in the face, arms, and chest, blinding her in one eye and rendering one of her hands permanently unusable. Baby Carlita was wounded in the chest, abdomen, and neck. Astolfo was wounded in the chest and head. The couple managed to stagger away from Huberty's line of fire, and Maricela handed her crying baby to her husband, who, in turn, handed her to a stranger named Lucia Velasco just as Maricela collapsed. Lucia handed the baby to a police officer, and the two rushed the baby to the hospital, Lucia holding her hand over one of the baby's wounds to try to contain the bleeding, and the officer using the hand he wasn't driving with to contain another wound. Maricela, Astolfo, and baby Carlita all survived. Then there were 3 11-year-old boys. They'd just gone to get donuts, but one of the friends wanted ice cream as well, so they rode their BMX bikes to the McDonald's. As they pedaled into the parking lot, they heard someone from across the street yelling at them, but they couldn't make out what they were saying, so they hesitated. It was right then that Huberty shot all 3 boys. David Flores Delgado received several gunshot wounds to his head and died instantly. Omar Alonso Hernandez received several gunshots to his back and died a few minutes later, and Joshua Coleman, critically wounded in the back, arm, and leg, collapsed but was still alive. He'd just watched his friend, David, get killed. And then he watched Omar, his happy, humble best friend, with whom he conversed back and forth over their backyard fences as they helped each other learn the other's native language, struggle until he too died. Sir Joshua, having previously pondered what he might do were he in a similarly dire situation, laid still, playing dead, until the SWAT team would later come to rescue him, over an hour later. Next, Huberty targeted an elderly couple that was walking toward the entrance. 74-year-old Miguel Victoria Aloa and 69-year-old Ada Velezque Victoria. Huberty shot Ada in the face, which also wounded Miguel. Miguel instinctively began cradling his wife and wiping blood from her face while cursing at Huberty. Huberty swore back at Miguel, then shot him in the head, killing him. About 10 minutes after the first call to police had been placed, police arrived at the correct McDonald's. As soon as the first patrol car arrived, Huberty began firing at it, shattering its windshield and emergency lights. Police locked down the area spanning 6 blocks from the restaurant and established a command post 2 blocks away. 175 officers were deployed at strategic positions, soon joined by SWAT, a special weapons and tactics team. But still, they were unsure of how to approach such a dangerous situation. Huberty returned to the inside of the restaurant and continued his killing spree. At one point, he went to the cashier counter to adjust the radio. Victims assumed to listen for news of the incident, but instead he turned it to a music station and began dancing. A few minutes later, he searched the kitchen area and found a group of employees hiding. Huberty exclaimed, "Oh, there's more. You're trying to hide from me, you bastards," and opened fire. Two of employees, 18-year-old Margarita Padilla and 17-year-old Wendy Flanagan, grabbed each other's hands and tried to run for it, but Huberty fatally shot Margarita. Wendy was able to make it to a basement utility room. Of the remaining group of hiders, Huberty shot and killed 21-year-old Paulina Lopez and 19-year-old Elsa Borbo Fierro. He then shot 17-year-old Albert Leos, critically wounding him. Running out of ammunition, Huberty heads to the front of the restaurant to reload, giving Albert an opportunity to escape by dragging himself down the stairs to join a group of survivors hiding in the basement utility room. Two other employees from the group were able to successfully flee down a stairway and through to an emergency exit, escaping. Earlier that morning, Albert had actually contemplated not coming into work that day and joining his friends who invited him to hang out. But being the responsible young man that he was, he came into work instead. In the utility room, Albert would join 2 male and 3 female co-workers, one of whom was Wendy, who had taken refuge there, along with a woman and a baby. Once Albert arrived, he removed the shoelaces from his shoes and used them to make a tourniquet for his left arm, which was losing blood quickly, and he bit down on a cloth to stifle his cries of pain to avoid putting the entire group at risk of being discovered. At one point, 11-year-old Aurora Pena, the young girl who was shielded by her 18-year-old pregnant aunt and was laying next to her slain aunt, cousin, and friends, heard a lull in the shooting and opened her eyes. Huberty happened to be staring in her direction and noticed her open her eyes. He cursed, threw some French fries at her, then shot her in the arm, neck, and jaw. She miraculously survived, but would spend longer in the hospital than any other survivor. Huberty would similarly return to shoot and kill other injured but still alive victims, like injured Jose Perez, who lay moaning in pain next to his friend 22-year-old Gloria Gonzalez and a young lady named Michelle Carnprez, both of whom Huberty had already killed. After minutes passed, then an hour, everyone inside the restaurant wondered, where are the police? At 5:05 p.m., over an hour after the first call to police was made, all responding law enforcement personnel were authorized to kill the assailant should they obtain a clear shot. At one point, the official green light to shoot was withdrawn, but was reinstated at 5:13. It was around that time that SWAT sharpshooter Charles Foster positioned himself along with a spotter onto the roof of the post office just south of the McDonald's. He could see the bodies on the floor of the restaurant, but he could also see that Huberty was at an advantage. Huberty had a clear view of the parking lot and the surrounding area, so anyone who tried to approach, even just to give aid to the people shot outside the restaurant, were driven away by more gunfire. The windows of the restaurant were both tinted and coated with a laminate. So not only was it hard to see into the restaurant due to the tinting, but once the windows were shot at and shattered, the laminate held much of them in place, spidering the windows and creating an even more obstructed view. And at 5:00 p.m., the sun also wreaked havoc on their ability to see into the restaurant. So Foster's job was a challenge. He didn't actually see Huberty until just before shooting him, which happened when Foster finally got a glimpse of Huberty through the restaurant's double doors, the only doors whose safety glass was fully shattered out by Huberty's gunfire. Foster could see Huberty's legs dangling as he sat on top of the cashier counter, reloading one of his magazines with ammunition. Then Huberty hopped off the counter and began walking toward the shattered double doors. From Foster's vantage point, Huberty's head and neck were blocked by the doorframe, but his chest and torso were not. At 5:17 p.m., Foster shot a single shot through Huberty's heart, killing him instantly. It was one of just 5 bullets fired by police throughout the duration of the massacre. The other 4 were fired at the same time as Foster's, but they missed the assailant. The ordeal lasted 77 minutes. The assailant expended 257 rounds of ammunition, mostly from the Uzi. 21 people were killed and 19 were injured. 17 of the victims were killed inside the restaurant, and 4 were killed just outside the restaurant. There were only 10 uninjured survivors from the inside of the restaurant, 6 of whom were hidden inside the basement utility room. The youngest person killed was just 8 months old, and the oldest was 74. While everyone was relieved the ordeal was over, no one had any idea of the devastation they'd find inside. Police entered, but were not prepared for what they saw. The carnage was unimaginable. Employees, customers, men, women, children, babies, they were laying everywhere. As SWAT Commander Jerry Sanders reflected, I went through nightmares. So did a lot of the other guys. You can never put that vision out of your mind. Survivors were removed from the restaurant and treated. Guadalupe Del Rio, who had been shielded by her two friends but was also shot herself, didn't realize that she'd been shot. An officer asked her afterward if she was okay. She kept saying yes. So rather than alarm her, the officer took her to an ambulance where they treated her for the gunshot. Once the ordeal was over and the dust began to settle, the focus was on the police response time. Given that there were multiple types of firearms being shot as well as conflicting descriptions of the perpetrator, police contended that it was unclear how many assailants were inside the restaurant. They also reported that they were unsure whether any hostages were being held. Several law enforcement officers stated they thought it was a robbery gone wrong, and that the perpetrator was likely inside standing off with police and shooting out to police, but not shooting anyone inside. With a nearly constant, near-deafening sounds of 257 rounds fired throughout the ordeal, including into stainless steel equipment, and with victims clearly being murdered just outside the restaurant, the claim that police didn't know that people were being shot inside was incomprehensible to survivors. Victims and their families additionally contend that individuals who escaped had informed police that there was just a single gunman holding no hostages and shooting everyone he encountered. Another point of contention between law enforcement and the victims and their families was the San Diego Police Department's initial report following the massacre. It indicated that most everyone injured or killed within the restaurant had been shot by Huberty in the first 10 minutes after he had entered the restaurant. This claim was hotly disputed by survivors, who stated Huberty had shot both unwounded and wounded people over 40 minutes after he first opened fire, and that many who were shot in the beginning didn't die right away and could have been saved had they received aid. They cited multiple instances where people were shot or reshot late into the rampage, including Jose Perez and Aurora Pina. Mentioned previously, Ronald Herrera, who was shot by the gunman early on then again 45 minutes later, as well as the group of employees Huberty found and massacred over 30 minutes after the rampage began. To this day, victims and their families strongly contend that waiting 77 minutes for help to intervene was a failure beyond measure that cost both injured and not yet shot victims their lives. While police contend that they responded appropriately given the information or lack of information they had at any given point, and also that they were tasked with weighing the safety of any hostages that might be inside, all amidst an unfamiliar, unprecedented, and unfathomably brutal scenario. In 1984, the Sani Syndrome massacre at McDonald's was the worst massacre by a gunman in U.S. history at the time. As of 2023, it now stands as the 8th worst. In the wake of the tragedy, McDonald's Corporation suspended all its advertising for the week following the massacre. Rival Burger King followed suit, suspending all its advertising as well. Baby Carlita, now Carla, was a miracle baby. After the massacre, where she was handed over to a stranger, Maricela and Astolfo, who underwent surgery at different hospitals, would be separated from her for 2 full weeks, all the while not knowing whether baby Carlita had survived, and unable to get connected with her. When they were reunited, doctors informed them that they had to remove part of Carlita's intestines and 30 pieces of shard. They said it was a miracle that she survived. Tragically, Astolfo would later be murdered in 1990. Albert Leos, the young man who crawled down the stairs to safety and fashioned his own tourniquet, went on to become a police officer. He now proudly serves as a captain at the San Diego Police Department. In 1986, Edna Huberty filed lawsuits against McDonald's, as well as Huberty's former employer, Babcock and Wilcox. She claimed that the fumes from Babcock and Wilcox and the food from McDonald's, specifically MSG, caused Huberty delusions and uncontrollable rage. Her lawsuits were dismissed. Edna Huberty died in 2003 of breast cancer. Several family members of those killed, along with survivors of the massacre, filed lawsuits against McDonald's and the San Diego Police Department for negligence. The suits were dismissed, and on appeal, the courts ruled in favor of the defendants. They ruled that McDonald's or any other business has no duty of care to protect patrons from an unforeseeable assault by a murderous madman, and the implemented security measures typically used by restaurants to deter criminals, such as guards and closed-circuit television cameras, could not possibly have deterred the perpetrator, as he did not care about his own survival. The courts also released the San Diego Police Department of any culpability or negligence. They stated, in view of the sheer horror of the ordeal, It is difficult to imagine anything the police could have done or failed to do which would have made the risk any greater than that to which the victims were exposed before the police arrived. In 2014, 30 years after the tragedy, Huberty's oldest daughter, Zelia, gave an interview for the first time. Having been just 12 years old at the time, she recalls how she watched the bloody tragedy from her window. She said, "I had a perfect view of it. I saw the car there. I saw everything. I saw people I knew, who I went to school with. I wasn't thinking anything that time, except better them than me." I know that's a horrible thing to say, but as a 12-year-old, that's the sort of thing you think, she said. She said that if she could turn back the clock, probably would have killed my father before any of this would have occurred. Her life was not easy after the shooting. She shared how she was treated poorly by people whenever they found out who her dad was. She moved twice within a year after the shootings and went to school under an assumed name, although she now uses her real name and still gets comments. She was taken to city-mandated therapy after the massacre, but considered the sessions a nuisance. Once they ended after 12 weeks, she never returned. She did have a fear for a while that she might turn into her father, seeing a lot of similarities between him and herself. But she recognized that she's educated, different, and that the acts he performed were a conscious decision. And the survivors, they were impacted too. Whether from the ongoing pain of their injuries or the trauma of having lived through what no one should have to, they continue to suffer the aftermath through this day. Many couldn't function, being affected by loud noises, crowds, and just normal daily occurrences. And being in restaurants was particularly frightening. One victim shared how her first thought when she enters a restaurant is, "Where are the exits?" And she's on high alert the entire time. As a result of the massacre, police developed special tactical teams to deal with mass shootings. They'd also implemented active shooter protocol, where the objective is to gain entry and take its own fleet of helicopters. SWAT officers dedicated to hostage rescue and special responses increased training, more resources, more tech, and more expertise in such scenarios all around. After the massacre, McDonald's moved swiftly to make repairs. And within 48 hours, they repaired the McDonald's and were ready to reopen its doors. But the community outcry was swift. They wouldn't hear of it, and McDonald's Corporation reversed the decision. The building was demolished on September 26, 1984, and the McDonald's Corporation donated $1 million to a San Isidro Survivors Fund. Amidst protests from San Isidro residents and donors, the first payout from this fund was issued to Etna Hurry. McDonald's Corporation also donated the property to the city. And in 1988, Southwestern College built a satellite campus in its place. Then in 1990, a monument was built to honor the victims of the massacre. The memorial is constructed of 21 hexagon-shaped granite pillars, ranging in height from 1 to 6 feet, each representing each victim. And a plaque lists their names, along with a heartfelt statement. In 2016, a documentary called 77 Minutes was released, detailing the massacre. Ironically and tragically, the San Isidro massacre has something in common with another, more recent mass shooting in the U.S., the Uvalde, Texas shooting. Despite the decades of time that passed between the two deadly massacres, the response time before the perpetrator was brought down in both cases was exactly 77 minutes.